Hey friends, about 70% of folks watching my videos aren't subscribed. If you enjoy these stories, consider subscribing. It really helps the channel grow. Drop a like, leave a comment, and let me know where you're tuning in from. The cold of the early morning cut through my jacket as I climbed into the Ranger truck, my breath fogging up the windshield. Out here in northern Idaho, the mornings felt longer, the silence heavier. I had been a park ranger for nearly 5 years, stationed in the most remote part of the park, and I had grown to appreciate the stillness. It was the kind of silence that settled into your bones, the kind you could rely on to reset your mind after weeks of busy patrols. The forest was my home, the trees my companions. I had the usual tasks ahead of me. Check the trail markers, make sure the hikers' routes were safe, and ensure that no one was making a mess of the wilderness. Everything was routine, or at least it should have been. As I drove along the rough dirt path toward the first checkpoint, my radio crackled to life, a garbled static sound cutting through the morning. I grimaced. Radio interference wasn't unusual in these parts, but this was different. The voice on the other side was faint, but I could make out one word clearly. Danger. I paused for a moment, but the radio went silent again. Just the wind. Probably a glitch in the system, I thought, but that feeling of unease hung in the air like a cloud. I shook my head, trying to shake off the sudden discomfort. By the time I reached the trailhead, the sun had fully risen, its light slanting through the tall pines. I parked my truck and grabbed my gear. The day should have been as ordinary as any other until the second message came through. The same static, the same voice, but this time a warning. The forest is watching. I furrowed my brow. Chill ran down my spine, the hairs on my neck prickled. Something wasn't right. I set out on the trail, trying to focus on the task at hand. It wasn't until I came across the torn backpack, its contents scattered on the dirt, that I realized how serious things had become. The pack looked out of place, abandoned in the middle of the trail. It belonged to a hiker named Kyle, who had gone missing a few days ago, and now I could feel it. Something was coming. As I surveyed the scene, my instincts kicked in. I followed the fresh footprints, unmistakable signs of someone who'd been here recently. The trail led deeper into the woods, where trees grew closer together, blocking out the sunlight. And with each step, the uneasy feeling in my chest grew heavier. The further I ventured into the forest, the quieter it became. The usual sounds of birds chirping and leaves rustling in the wind had faded. In their place was an oppressive silence, one that felt like it was pressing in on me from all sides. The kind of silence that made you wonder if the forest itself was holding its breath. The trail twisted and turned, with the trees growing more gnarled and twisted the deeper I went. I was used to these woods, rugged terrain, but today it felt different. The atmosphere had shifted, as if the forest was no longer a neutral observer. It felt alive, like it was watching me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, but I pushed the thought aside. I needed to focus. As I followed the trail, something caught my eye. Scratches on the bark of a tree. I approached cautiously, noticing they weren't just random markings. They seemed deliberate, as though someone or something had carved symbols into the tree. It was unsettling, to say the least. I studied them for a moment, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. But before I could dwell on it further, I noticed something else: blood. Fresh blood splattered across the forest floor. I crouched down, scanning the area. The blood trail led farther into the woods, merging with fresh footprints. The scene was becoming more disturbing by the second. The forest felt darker now, the trees closing in around me, casting long shadows over the trail. The deeper I went, the more the air felt thick and heavy. Something was off. I stood up and started walking again, following the blood trail that led me toward a small clearing. As I reached the edge of the open space, I froze. There on the center of the clearing stood a man, wild-eyed and disheveled, his clothes torn and covered in dirt. He He was staring at me, his breathing ragged as though he had been running for hours. He spoke before I could say anything. "You're too late. He's already gone." His voice was hoarse, strained. I took a cautious step forward, trying to assess the situation. The man was trembling, his face gaunt and pale, like someone who hadn't eaten or slept in days. "How are you?" I asked, my hand resting on the sidearm holstered at my waist. His eyes flickered toward the woods behind me and he whispered, "The forest, it's alive, it's hunting us and it won't stop until it has you too." His words sent a chill down my spine, but I wasn't sure if he was just another lost soul or if there was more to his story. He didn't seem like a normal camper. The man's words didn't make sense, but they unsettled me all the same. I stepped closer, trying to get a better look at his face, but he flinched, backing away. "You need to leave, Ranger," he said, his voice barely a whisper now. "It's too late for Kyle in the forest. It demands blood." I couldn't make sense of it. A man in distress, a lost camper, maybe even someone who snapped under the pressure of isolation. But the way he spoke, the intensity in his eyes, it didn't sit right. My instincts told me to be cautious, to back away, but I was too deep into this already. I had to figure out what happened to Kyle. "Where's Kyle?" I asked again, more forcefully this time. The man's eyes flickered nervously, his breath quickening. "Gone, taken it." He dragged the man, he said, his hands trembling as he reached for a nearby broken branch. I had tried to warn him, I tried to stop him, but it's too strong, too powerful. I didn't know what he was talking about, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. "What do you mean it?" I asked, stepping closer with a firm voice. The man's eyes darted around as if looking for something or someone before he finally met my gaze again. "The forest," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "It's alive. It speaks to you." His hand trembled as he pointed toward the deeper woods, and his eyes were wide with fear. "You have to go. You're next. The ranger, it's already watching you." I couldn't understand him. This was the rambling of a person who lost their grip on reality. But the fear in his eyes, the desperation, it was real. And in that moment I realized something. The words were different. The air felt heavier and colder. There was a stillness to everything that shouldn't have been there. A silence that pressed down on me. As I stood there trying to process what the man had said, I heard it. A rustling sound coming from the trees behind me. I turned quickly but saw nothing. Just the thick shadows of the forest stretching longer with each passing second. I had an urge to move, to get out of the clearing and back to the trail. But before I could, a man lunged at me, grabbing my arm with an unnatural strength. "Get out of here." "It's too late," he screamed, his grip tightening. His eyes were wild and panicked. I tried to pull free, but he was stronger than I expected. "The forest doesn't let you leave. It won't let you leave." I managed to break free from his grasp, stumbling backward, my heart pounding. What the hell was happening? This wasn't just some random camper having a breakdown. This was something else entirely. I didn't hesitate for a second after breaking free from the camper's frantic grip. I turned and sprinted toward the trail, the thumping of my boots on the uneven ground drowning out the sound of my breathing. The tension in the air was thick, like the entire forest was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. My heart pounded in my chest, and I could feel cold sweat forming on my back. The camper's warning echoed in my mind. It won't let you leave. I had to find Kyle. That was the only thing that kept me moving, even as the forest seemed to close in around me. The trees stood tall and silent, their branches like outstretched arms reaching toward me as if to trap me within their grasp. I knew the woods well, but something about this place felt wrong. The deeper I went, the more distorted the landscape became. Trees twisted into unnatural shapes, and the air grew heavier with each step. I kept my eyes on the trail ahead, my instincts screaming at me to move faster. The silence was deafening except for the occasional rustle of leaves or a branch snapping in the distance. I had no idea where I was going anymore, just that I couldn't stop. The camper's warning lingered in my mind like a ghost, a constant reminder that something far worse was out there hunting me. Then I saw it. A flash of movement ahead just beyond the trees. A figure, a person. My breath caught in my throat as I recognized the silhouette. It was Kyle, or at least it looked like him. His clothes were torn, his face gaunt, and his eyes hollow with fear. But there was something off about him. His movements were jerky, unnatural, like he wasn't fully in control of his own body. "Kyle," I called out, stepping toward him. "Kyle, it's me. Evan, are you okay?" He didn't respond. Instead, he kept moving, stumbling deeper into the woods. I hesitated for a moment, but the desperation in his eyes pulled me forward. I had to help him. I had to know what happened. As I pushed through the underbrush, following him deeper into the forest, the air grew colder. The trees seemed to close in around me, their branches creaking and groaning in the wind. The ground beneath my feet was soft and spongy, as if the earth itself were alive, shifting beneath my weight. And still Kyle didn't stop. He moved with a purpose, his steps growing faster, more erratic. "Kyle, wait!" I shouted, but he didn't slow down. In fact, he seemed to quicken his pace, moving with an unnatural speed. Something was very wrong. I broke into a sprint trying to catch up, but I was no match for his speed. He was almost out of sight, now disappearing into the shadows of the trees. I couldn't lose him. Not now. Then suddenly the ground beneath me gave way. I stumbled and fell forward, crashing to the ground with a sickening thud. My radio crackled to life, static filling the air before a distorted voice broke through. "Evan, it's too late. Get out of the woods now." I pulled myself to my feet, my heart racing, my mind scrambling for answers. What was happening? Well, it was Kyle running. And why did the forest feel like it was closing in on me? I stumbled to my feet, shaking off the disorientation. The voice on the radio echoed in my ears, but the crackling static quickly overtook the words. The forest around me had fallen into an oppressive silence, as though the trees themselves were listening, waiting for the next move. I knew I could keep running after Kyle. Something far darker than a missing hiker was at play here. I had to stop and think. I looked around, scanning the twisted trees and the deep shadows that seemed to swallow the light. There was no sign of Kyle anymore, no trace of movement. It was as if he had simply disappeared into the woods. I gripped my radio again, trying to get some kind of signal, but it was useless. The forest seemed to be actively blocking out any attempt to communicate, to break the eerie stillness. That's when I heard it, a growl that seemed to come from all around me. My pulse quickened and I instinctively reached for my sidearm, though I knew it wouldn't do much against whatever was hunting us. The sound grew louder, closer, and I realized with a jolt that it wasn't coming from one direction, but from everywhere at once. I couldn't see the source, but I could feel it, a presence closing in around me, an ancient hunger in the air. I didn't wait to see what it was. My feet mobbed before my mind could catch up, and I bolted in the opposite direction, back toward the mine shaft. If there was any hope of surviving this, I needed to find some kind of refuge, a place to regroup, to figure out what the hell was happening. As I ran, the forest seemed to come alive in ways I couldn't explain. The trees groaned as if they were alive, the branches scraping against each other like claws. I could hear something moving behind me, too fast, too close. It was stalking me. Something was tracking my every step, knowing in my movements, adapting to my flight. I did not look back, but I could feel its presence. The ground beneath me became treacherous, and I had to leap over exposed roots and rocks, trying to keep my footing as the forest itself seemed determined to trip me. The trail to the mine was long and narrow, barely wide enough for one person, but I kept pushing forward. The growling noises continued to echo through the trees, punctuated by the sounds of something heavy crashing through the underbrush behind me. The creatures, or whatever they were gaining ground. I reached the mine shaft just as I thought I couldn't run any longer. I threw myself into the narrow entrance, panting and gasping for air. The cold, damp air of the shaft hit me like a slap to the face. I didn't stop to catch my breath. Instead, I kept moving deeper into the mine, away from whatever was lurking outside. The faint growls from the forest grew muffled as I descended into the darkness. As I made my way through the narrow tunnels, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching me. The shadows in the corners of the mine seemed to shift, and the darkness seemed to close in tighter the deeper I went. I knew the forest wasn't far behind me, but the mine felt like the only place I could catch my breath, if only for a moment. But that moment didn't last long. I could hear the sounds of footsteps muffled by dirt and stone, echoing off the walls. They were following me. Whatever was in the woods wasn't just hunting me, it was coming for me here too. The echo of footsteps grew louder, closer. I turned, trying to make sense of the shifting shadows in the mine. It was pitch black, except for the dim light from my flashlight, which trembled in my grip as if even the light was afraid to stay still. Every corner, every crevice seemed to hide something. A sudden noise, something scraping against rock, sent a shiver up my spine. I wasn't alone. I backed away, my heart pounding, but I had nowhere to go. The mad path through the mine twisted like a snake, narrowing with every step. There was no escape. I was trapped. Whatever was out there was closing in, and the deeper I went, the more oppressive the silence became, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Then, out of the darkness, a figure emerged. It wasn't Kyle. It wasn't even human. The maniacal Kemper Eric appeared, his eyes wide with madness, his face drawn in pale. He stepped forward, dragging a rusted machete through the dirt, its edge glinting in the weak light. He was muttering to himself something about sacrifices and the forest's hunger. "Evan," he rasped, his voice strained. "You think you can outrun it? You can't. The forest wants you. It's been watching, waiting. It always gets what it wants." I stepped back, instinctively, my hand instinctively reaching for my sidearm. But I hesitated. There was something in his eyes, something beyond madness. This wasn't just a man driven to the edge. He had become something else, something twisted, warped by the forest itself. "You don't understand," I said, my voice shaky but firm. "Whatever you think you've seen, whatever you think you're hearing, it's not real. This is all in your head. You're sick. The forest. It's not alive. It can't be." Eric's laugh was low. A laugh that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside him, from a place where humanity no longer existed. "It's alive, Evan, and you will die by its hands." The machete gleamed in his hand as he advanced his steps, slow but purposeful. I wasn't sure if I could outrun him now. I had to fight, but I wasn't sure if it was Eric I was fighting anymore. Something far worse than had taken root inside of him. "Stay back," I shouted, drawing my weapon. But the sound of my own voice felt hollow, as if the forest had swallowed my words before they ever reached him. But he didn't stop. He lunged forward, his arms outstretched, his mouth twisted in a grotesque grin. I fired. The bullet struck his chest, but it didn't stop him. Eric kept coming undeterred. The forest had given him power. It turned him into something more than human. The shot only seemed to fuel his fury. He didn't even flinch. With a growl, I sidestepped his next swing, narrowly avoiding the edge of his blade. My heart was racing now. I couldn't keep dodging him like this. I had to do something drastic. I led him further into the mine, deeper into its depths, hoping that the environment would give me an edge. I knew the tunnels well, having mapped them out years ago. If I could just get to the narrowest part of the shaft, I could use the walls to my advantage. With one last desperate move, I turned and sprinted down the mine's winding path, pushing forward, knowing Eric would be right behind me. I could hear his heavy breathing, the scrape of his machete against the walls as he followed. The adrenaline coursed through me, my instincts took over. I was fighting for my life. Then I reached it, the narrowest part of the mine shaft. It was a sheer drop, a deep hole that had collapsed years ago, leaving an opening leading to a vertical drop. I stopped and, with a swift movement, turned, grabbed a rock, and hurled it at Eric. It distracted him just long enough for me to catch him off guard. Eric lunged forward, but in his frenzy he missed his footing and stumbled toward the edge. I shoved him with everything I had into the darkness below. He didn't scream, he didn't even struggle. He fell, his body disappearing into the abyss with a sickening thud. I stood there for a long time, the adrenaline slowly draining from my body as the silence swallowed the mine. I could follow the weight of everything that had happened. Eric, the forest, the madness, all of it pressed down on me. The air was thick and I could barely catch my breath. I had survived, but at what cost? Mine felt different now, quieter, almost peaceful, but that peace felt wrong, like the calm before a storm. I hadn't expected to find myself here, standing at the edge of a mine shaft after everything that had happened. The eerie stillness of the forest outside seemed to have crept inside the walls with me. It was as if the forest had paused, held its breath, and waited. But I wasn't sure if I was still safe. Eric's death hadn't brought closure. If anything, it only made things worse. The forest had been watching, guiding him, using him. Had it let me live only to toy with me? Or was it finally satisfied? I didn't know, but I couldn't stay there any longer. I took one last look at the hole where Eric had fallen, the faint light from my flashlight barely illuminating the depths below. The forest was waiting for something, so I didn't know what that something was, but I had no intention of finding out. I had to leave. I had to get back to the ranger station. The warnings on the radio were still fresh in my mind. The message had been clear, even if I hadn't fully understood it at the time. Something had been in the woods, something that hunted, something that made people do terrible things. I wasn't going to let it get to me. I wasn't going to be its next victim. As I turned to leave, I felt a strange sensation in the back of my mind, a feeling that the trees themselves were shifting following my movements. The path out of the mine felt longer, more treacherous than it had on my way in. The shadows seemed to stretch further than before, as if the very landscape was closing in on me. And then I heard it. A rustle of leaves, whisper in the wind, the faintest sound of something following me. I didn't turn around. I couldn't afford to. My footsteps quickened as I made my way through the dark mine shaft, each step more urgent than the last. I pushed through narrow passageways and winding tunnels until I finally reached the entrance. The light of day, weak and overcast, greeted me, and I breathed a sigh of relief. I'm Ben Carter, a park ranger with the U.S. Forest Service stationed in the vast and largely untouched wilderness of New Mexico. I've spent nearly a decade patrolling these sprawling lands, mountains, canyons, and dry, brittle desert. It's been my life, and I know these woods better than my own skin. But this recent encounter, this thing I found, it's something I still don't understand, something that changed everything. I've seen my fair share of strange things over the years, freak weather patterns, the occasional wild animal acting out of place, and the odd local rumor, but nothing could have prepared me for this. It began about a month ago. My routine patrol took me deep into a secluded area near the Gila National Forest. The region had been closed off to the public for months due to a wildlife management issue, but no one had explained what that meant. The U.S. Forest Service wasn't exactly forthcoming with details, and, as usual, I didn't ask too many questions. That day, I was surveying a narrow ravine when I first heard it, a low, distant hum, something so faint at first that I thought it was the wind. But it wasn't. I stopped in my tracks, scanning the area, trying to determine the source of the sound. It wasn't natural, it didn't belong. It didn't fit the usual symphony of the forest, and my instincts immediately went on high alert. I should have turned back right then, but curiosity got the better of me. As I moved deeper into the ravine, the hum intensified like something was vibrating the very ground beneath my boots. It was strange, almost mechanical. My radio crackled to life with a voice from headquarters, but I barely heard it over the sound. Then I saw just a flash of movement on the edge of my vision. Something huge, fast, and just wrong. I didn't even know what I was looking at. It was like a shadow moving against the grain of the forest. The forest didn't move like that. I grabbed my rifle just in case. I pressed forward cautiously, trying to make sense of what was going on. But as I got closer, the air around me seemed to thicken, pressing against my chest like it was holding me back. Every step felt like I was walking through water, and then suddenly the hum stopped. Everything went eerily silent. It was as if the entire forest held its breath. I felt a prickling on the back of my neck like I was being watched. That's when I saw it, something in the distance, just beyond a cluster of scrub trees. A figure tall, unnaturally tall. It stood motionless, its shape barely visible in the shadows. I couldn't make out details from where I stood, but it was enough to freeze my blood. The forest around me felt wrong. This was no animal, no person. Whatever it wasn't meant to be here. It hadn't been here before, and it shouldn't be now. I didn't wait to investigate further. I turned and ran. The feeling that something was chasing me, stalking me, was suffocating. The forest seemed to close in around me, branches reaching out like claws trying to stop me, to pull me back into whatever it was that I had just disturbed. I made it back to the ranger station in record time, my heart hammering in my chest. When I finally staggered through the door, the first thing I did was lock it behind me. I'm no man easily rattled, but I knew something now. It wasn't right. I tried to shake the memory of that shadow from my mind, but it lingered like a bad dream. My hands were shaking as I poured myself a drink of water. I needed to clear my head. I grabbed the radio dialing into headquarters, hoping for an explanation. There was no mention of any unusual sightings or activities in the area, which was odd. It was like the Forest Service was deliberately ignoring something. I asked my superior, Andy Shaw, about the sealed-off area. His response was typical of him, brief and dismissive. "It's nothing, Carter. Don't worry about it." I could tell he was hiding something. Maybe it was protocol, maybe it was something more, but whatever it was, I had to find out. The next morning I found myself back at the ravine. The landscape was eerily quiet. No him this time. Those strange shadows. Just the harsh New Mexico sun and the rustling of dry leaves in the wind. I didn't know what I was expecting to find. There was nothing to indicate the presence of the creature. No tracks, no disturbed earth, no sign of anything out of place. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, something watching me. I walked deeper into the ravine, my boots crunching against the dry ground. My eyes darted between the sparse trees, looking for any sign of life. The silence weighed heavily on me, making each step feel like I was intruding on something ancient. The whole place felt haunted, and I wasn't sure whether I was more afraid of what I might find or what might find me. That's when I saw it again. A flicker of movement in the distance. Too fast for my eyes to track, but unmistakable. A shape. It was larger this time, more defined. Its form twisting and shifting in a way that defied nature. I froze, barely daring to breathe. My hand instinctively went to the rifle slung across my back, but I knew it wouldn't do much against whatever that thing was. He didn't move toward me, though. I just stood there watching me. The air grew thicker, suffocating, like the world was holding its breath. I swallowed hard and took a cautious step forward, but before I could get closer, the creature, if that's what it even was, disappeared into the trees like it was never there to begin with. I stood there for what felt like hours, trying to process what I had just seen. Was I losing my mind, or had I stumbled upon something far worse than I could understand? The truth was, I didn't know. And for the first time in my career as a park ranger, I didn't feel prepared to face whatever this was. For the next few days, I tried to make sense of the creature I had seen, but the more I thought about it, the more questions I had. I wasn't sure if it was a hallucination, an unknown animal, or something else. I'd worked in some of the most remote areas of the country, seen creatures that were rare or endangered, and encountered plenty of bizarre situations. But this was unlike anything I'd ever faced before. I wasn't the only one who had noticed something strange. A few days after I saw the creature, a fellow ranger, Daniel Jacobs, came to me with his own story. He'd been assigned to patrol a nearby stretch of wilderness when it bordered the Gila National Forest. Daniel was a good man, steady, with years of experience, but his face was pale when he approached me. He said, his voice tight, "I need to talk to you about something. Something's been going on out there. I don't know how to explain it." I invited him to sit down in the break room of the station. He looked around nervously before lowering his voice. "It's not like any animal I've ever seen," Daniel continued. "It's something bigger. Something that shouldn't be out there. I don't know if I believe in the supernatural, but after what happened, I'm starting to wonder." He told me about his own experience, how he'd been following tracks in the sand near the forest edge when he saw a figure in the distance just like the one I had seen. He described it as a shadow, only this time it didn't vanish. It followed him, staying just out of sight but close enough that he could feel its presence. We made it back to his truck only by sheer luck, running for miles without looking back. "And whatever it is, it's hunting us," Daniel said, his voice breaking. "I don't know what to do. No one's listening." That's when it hit me. The Forest Service wasn't unaware of what was going on. They were covering it up. They were trying to hide something, but what and why? I know I couldn't stay quiet. I had to find out what this thing was, even if it meant going against the very people I'd sworn to work with. I told Daniel I'd look into it, but the truth was I didn't know where to begin. There were no reports of anything unusual in the area, no sightings that had been logged into the system, but someone had to know something. I needed more information. I decided to pay a visit to the one person who might have some answers, the local historian and environmental researcher, Evelyn Hayes. She was a bit of a recluse, living in a cabin on the outskirts of the park. I'd met her a few times during my time here, but she was always distant, keeping to herself. She knew the land better than anyone and had studied it for decades. If anyone knew what was really going on in those woods, it was her. As I drove through the winding roads toward her cabin, the air felt thick again, like something was waiting just beyond the horizon. My mind raced with possibilities, government experiments, secret military operations, something darker. I had no idea what I would find, but I knew I couldn't stop now. I had to know. Evelyn Hayes' cabin was tucked deep within the forest, surrounded by dense trees and the kind of silence that only remote places seem to have. As I pulled up to the small wooden house, I noticed that it seemed more rundown than I remembered. The windows were half covered with old blinds. The porch was cluttered with stacks of books and journals. It looked like Evelyn hadn't been keeping up with things. I knocked on the door, but there was no answer. I knocked again, this time a little louder, but still nothing. Just as I was about to leave, I heard a soft shuffling from inside, followed by the door creaking open. Evelyn stood in the doorway, her face as weathered as the cabin. She had short, graying hair, sharp blue eyes that seemed to miss nothing, and a presence that made you feel like she knew more than she was willing to share. "What do you want, Ranger Carter?" she asked, her voice rough but not unfriendly. I need your help," I said, trying to sound calm despite the growing unease in my chest. "There's something out there in the gala, something strange, something I've never seen before, and I think you might know something about it." Her expression didn't change, but I saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes. She stepped aside and gestured for me to come in, though her posture remained stiff. The interior of her cabin was cluttered with maps, journals, and various scientific equipment. It felt like a place where secrets were kept. I couldn't help but wonder how much Evelyn truly knew about the things that roamed these woods. "I've been hearing things," she said, sitting down at a desk cluttered with papers. "Not just recently either. This has been going on for years. I thought it was just folklore stories from the locals, but it seems like it's more than that now." I logged in, my curiosity piqued. "What are you talking about?" Evelyn hesitated, staring at the desk as if she were debating whether or not to tell me. Then she spoke, her voice lowered this time. "There's an old legend that some of the native tribes around here used to talk about a creature, something they called the Watcher. It's said to be a protector of the land. But not in the way you think. It doesn't protect the land from people, it protects the land for people. It ends like being disturbed, and when you disturb it, it reacts." I blinked, unsure of what to make of this. A protector that doesn't sound like anything I've ever heard of. Evelyn nodded. "Most people haven't, but I've been doing some research for years. There's evidence. Old records, journals from rangers, even military personnel, that point to something out there. Something that's not just an animal or a spirit. I've been trying to get more answers, but the government, well, they're not exactly interested in the truth getting out." I leaned back, taking in the information. I had always been skeptical of local myths and rumors, but this felt different. Evelyn was no fool. She'd seen something known, something that was connected to the creature I had encountered. "I think the Forest Service knows more than they're letting on," I said, my voice growing more urgent. "There's been too much silence, too many secrets." She looked at me, her eyes narrowing. "You're not wrong, but be careful, Ben. Whatever this thing is, it doesn't just disappear. It protects something out there, and the deeper you go, the more it will come after you." Her words hung in the air, heavy and unsettling. I didn't know if I believed in the Watcher just yet, but I knew I couldn't back down. Not now. There was something in those woods that needed to be stopped. I could feel it in my bones. The warning Evelyn gave me stayed with me as I left her cabin. The air felt heavier as I drove back through the winding roads, her words echoing in my mind. It doesn't just disappear, it protects something. I couldn't shake the idea that the creature I had encountered wasn't merely some random anomaly in the woods. It was part of something much larger, something buried in the depths of the wilderness. And it was watching, waiting for anyone who dared to uncover its secrets. The next day I geared up for another patrol, but this time it was different. I wasn't just looking for wildlife or surveying the area. I was hunting answers. I knew I had to go back to the heart of it, the ravine, where I had seen the creature. If there was a chance of understanding what I was dealing with, I had to face it head on. But this time I wasn't going alone. Daniel Jacobs had insisted on coming with me. "Ben," he said the night before, his face pale, his eyes wide with fear, "this isn't something you should do alone. Whatever it is, we need to figure it out together." I hadn't wanted to drag anyone else into this madness, but I knew Daniel was right. It wasn't just about the creature anymore. There were forces at play here that I didn't fully understand, and I couldn't face them on my own. The government's silence, Evelyn's warnings, and the strange reports of other sightings all pointed to something bigger than I had imagined. As we trekked deeper into the ravine, the oppressive silence from my previous visit returned. The sun filtered through the trees, casting eerie beams that sent long shadows across the ground. The forest felt unnaturally still, as if it were waiting for something. My heart raced as I remembered how the creature had stalked me that day and vanished without a trace. And I couldn't afford to back down now. We moved cautiously, scanning the terrain for any sign of movement. For miles there was nothing, no creatures, no disturbances. It was as if the forest itself had become an impenetrable wall. I was beginning to wonder if I had imagined it all when, without warning, a distant howl broke the silence. A low sound that made my blood run cold. It wasn't an animal sound, it was something else. Daniel froze. "What is that?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Before I could answer, the ground beneath us shifted. It wasn't an earthquake, but something far more unsettling. The earth seemed to groan as if responding to an ancient call. A rumbling sound echoed through the trees. The ground trembled beneath our feet. Then I saw it. A figure far off in the distance, emerging from the trees. This time it wasn't just a shadow. It was solid, towering and moving with unnatural speed. Its form was indistinct, but its size alone was enough to make my stomach drop. It was far too large to be any animal I had ever encountered, and yet there was something eerily human about it. Daniel gasped, his eyes wide in disbelief. That's not possible. I couldn't argue with him. Whatever it wasn't human. It wasn't animal. It was something else, something ancient. And it was getting closer. In the distance, I saw something else that sent a chill down my spine, something that had been hidden in plain sight all along. A structure barely visible through the trees. The outline of a building, its corners swallowed by the overgrowth, was there. I had missed it when I passed through before, but now I saw it clearly. It was old, its walls were crumbling, and yet it stood firm against the weight of time. It was a ruin, but it wasn't just a ruin. It was a warning. I turned to Daniel, my voice low but urgent. "We need to get to that building," I said. "It's our only chance of understanding what's going on here." Before Daniel could respond, the creature roared again, this time closer and louder. Its presence was almost suffocating, and for the first time I realized how truly out of my depth I was. This wasn't just a creature, it was a guardian protecting something, hiding something, and I was about to find out what. The creature's roar vibrated through the ground, sending a surge of fear through my chest. Every muscle in my body screamed to run, but I knew I couldn't. The ruins were ahead, and that was the only place where I could possibly understand what was going on. Whatever it was, the creature had been guarding it for a reason. I just didn't know what that reason was. Yet I couldn't afford to back down now, not with Daniel beside me and the truth just beyond our reach. We moved quickly, the sound of the creature's heavy footsteps growing louder with every passing second. Daniel's breathing was shallow, and I could feel the tension radiating off him as he glanced back every few steps. I knew he was terrified, but I also knew he understood the stakes. We had to uncover whatever was hidden in those ruins. We had no other choice. The landscape changed as we drew closer to the building. The trees grew thicker, their trunks twisted and contorted as though they had been warped by forces beyond nature's control. The air grew colder and the wind picked up, carrying a faint scent of something decaying. We reached the structure just as the creature's form emerged from the forest's edge. The sheer size of it was unlike anything I had ever seen. Taller than any man with limbs that moved with unnatural fluidity. Its eyes were glowing faintly, but its face, that was what haunted me the most, was human, yet not. Distorted and twisted as though the very fabric of its existence was warped by time. I didn't have time to stare at it. As we reached the entrance to the ruins, I heard a sound, soft at first, but growing louder. A hum, a vibration that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the building. The ground beneath us pulsed with an almost rhythmic force. It was as if the structure itself was alive. I grabbed Daniel's arm, pulling him inside the entrance just as the creature reached the threshold of the ruins. The door to the structure creaked and groaned as if protesting our intrusion, but It opened wide and we rushed inside. Inside, the air was thick, the walls damp with age and decay. The hum was louder now, a low, resonant sound that filled the space. It was coming from somewhere deeper within the ruin. We stumbled through the darkened corridors, our steps muffled by the thick layers of dust and debris. The walls were covered in strange symbols, etched in patterns I didn't recognize. Some were circular, others angular, each one glowed faintly in the dim light. There was something unsettling about them, a sense of unease that gnawed at the edges of my mind. But we couldn't stop now. Whatever this place was, it was the key to understanding the creature, to understanding what had been happening in these woods for so long. At the heart of the ruins, we found it. A large chamber with walls covered in more symbols, and in the center an altar. On the altar lay a stone tablet, cracked and ancient. It was the source of the hum, the vibration that had been shaking the ground outside. I approached it slowly, my breath shallow, as if the very air around the tablet was thick with power. And there, etched into the surface of the stone, were the words I had been seeking. The watcher does not guard what is seen, but what is hidden. The realization hit me like a wave. The creature wasn't just protecting the land, it was guarding something beneath it. Something buried for reasons we could only begin to imagine. And that's when I knew the truth. The government must have known about this place. They must have known about the creature. They'd been keeping it hidden from the public, from us, for years. As I turned to share this revelation with Daniel, I saw his face go pale. He was looking behind me, his eyes wide with terror. Slowly I turned, and there it was. The creature standing at the entrance of the chamber, its eyes glowing with an intensity that sent a chill down my spine. It had followed us inside. I could feel the weight of its gaze as it stepped forward, and for a moment I thought it was going to attack. But then the ground trembled again, and the altar's hum grew louder. The creature froze its posture, shifting its glowing eyes, flicking to the tablet. It wasn't after us. It was after the tablet. In that moment I understood. The creature had been bound to the land for centuries, its purpose not to harm, but to keep watch over this ancient power. It wasn't a threat, it was a sentinel. And as the vibrations intensified, the creature turned and slowly retreated, vanishing into the dark corridors of the ruins. We stood there in stunned silence as the hum of the altar slowly faded. We had come seeking answers, and we had found them. But the truth was more complicated than I could have ever imagined. The creature wasn't our enemy, it was our guardian. And now I had to make a choice. Do I tell the world what I found? Do I expose the truth, knowing that some things are better left buried? I glanced at Daniel, and for the first time I saw the same question in his eyes. The truth was out there, but some secrets were never meant to be uncovered. I've been a park ranger in Mount Hood National Forest for over a decade, and nothing has ever truly shaken me. Sure, there are the occasional lost hikers, a few wild animal sightings, but nothing out of the ordinary. That changed a few weeks ago. It started with a missing persons report. A hiker had gone out alone on the Timberline Trail, and his wife called in a panic. He was supposed to be back by 5 p.m., but it was now 7 and he wasn't answering his phone. Something about the way she sounded frantic, desperate, told me this wasn't just a case of someone losing track of time. I took the night shift patrol to search for them. The air was cold, thick with fog, and the trees stood like silent sentinels, blocking out most of the moonlight. As I ventured deeper into the woods, a deep unease settled in my chest. It was too quiet. The usual sounds of rustling leaves or animal calls were absent. I followed the trail, each step crunching on the frost-covered ground, the silence pressing in around me. The usual sounds of the forest, distant calls of owls, the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush were absent, replaced by an unnerving stillness. Then I found it. Frantic footprints. They lit off the trail deeper into the forest. The prints were erratic, almost as if the person had been running or stumbling in a blind panic. I crouched to examine them, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The shape of the prints was unmistakable, a hiker's boot, with a solid worn tread, but something wasn't right. The ground around the prints was disturbed, torn up as though something had been dragged along with them. I followed the trail further, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. But then I found something worse. Another set of prints, larger and much larger than human. They were too deep and spread unnaturally wide. The toes splayed out like claws. The earth around them was torn, as though whatever left them had been moving with immense weight and power. I felt the cold sweat on my brow, but I couldn't stop now. Something wasn't right, and I needed answers. The prints led further off the path into the darker parts of the woods. The air grew heavier, the fog thicker, and for the first time in years I regretted being out here alone. I hesitated at the edge of the steep hillside, my boots slipping on the loose rocks as I followed the prints downward. The earth seemed to be alive, shifting beneath my feet with every step I took. And then I saw it, a scrap of clothing caught on a branch. It was torn, frayed at the edges, and stained with something dark. The fabric looked familiar, but it didn't matter. What mattered was what I saw next. The footprints of the hiker and the creature now seemed to line up perfectly, as though the thing had been stalking the person step by agonizing step. Whatever it wasn't just following, it was hunting. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself as the weight of the situation bore down on me. I couldn't turn back now. I had to know what was out here, and if I could help whoever was still out there. I moved further down the trail, careful not to lose the prints, when suddenly a scream pierced the silence. Distant but unmistakable, a cry of pure terror. It sent a shockwave through my chest, freezing me in place. But then I heard something else. A low, gravelly roar, far deeper than any animal I'd ever heard. It wasn't just a roar, though. It was mixed with a scream, as if whatever was chasing the hiker was so close that it had begun to drown out their cries. The sounds twisted together, sending a wave of ice through my veins. I didn't wait. I ran. I pressed my hand against my side, feeling the cold metal of my firearm beneath my jacket. It didn't give me much comfort, but it was the only thing I had. I kept telling myself that if the hiker was still alive, the gun might be the one thing that could make a difference. If I could find them in time, if I could stop whatever this thing was. The sounds of the forest seemed to grow quieter as I ran, the rush of my own breath drowning out everything else. My pulse thundered in my ears with each step, making my heart beat faster. I had to focus, I had to find them. I slowed my breathing and tried to steady my breath. My heart was pounding too loudly now, and I was beginning to lose track of the sounds that had been guiding me. I listened intently, straining to hear anything, but the woods were eerily silent. No more screams, no more growls, just the sound of my own feet crunching the underbrush. The gully opened up, and the fog seemed to thicken. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, a primal instinct warning me that something was very wrong. I stepped into the small clearing, shining my flashlight across the ground, scanning for any signs. My stomach twisted when I saw it. The signs of a struggle, broken branches, trampled ground, torn up dirt. And then I saw the fabric, blood-stained, torn to shreds, lying in the grass like it had been discarded. I couldn't breathe for a second as I crouched down beside it. The fabric was too familiar. It was the same as the scrap I had found earlier. This was real. The hiker was here and they were hurt. I fought to stay calm, but my mind was racing. This person wasn't just lost, they were being hunted. I could feel it deep in my gut, that sickening certainty. I had to keep going. I had to find them before it was too late. But as I scanned the clearing, the silence grew heavier, more oppressive. Like something was watching me. I kept searching my eyes, darting around the clearing, every muscle in my body tense, but all I could hear was the wind rustling through the trees. The silence was deafening, heavy, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. But then I heard it. A gnarled, sickening crunch, a sound that made my blood run cold. I whipped around, flashlight in hand, the beam cutting through the darkness. My breath caught in my throat as my eyes locked onto the unimaginable scene just beyond the tree line. There, lying in the shadows, was the hiker, or what was left of him. His body was mangled, torn open like a rag doll. His entrails spilled across the ground in a sickening display of brutality. But worse than the body, worse than the blood, was the thing crouching behind him. The creature was massive, its hulking form towering over the shredded remains of the hiker. Its body was covered in matted dark hair, thick and wild. Its head bobbed with each sickening crunch it made, the sound of bones breaking echoing through the night air. I could barely comprehend what I was seeing. Then it turned its head, its eyes locking with mine. Those eyes dark, empty, and full of hunger. Its mouth was a grotesque thing, stretched wide with sharp, jagged teeth glistening with blood. The stench of it hit me like a wave, rancid and foul. In its clawed hands it held the hiker's legs, tearing through them with grotesque ease. The creature chewed through bone like it was nothing more than celery. Its mouth moved with mechanical hunger. I stood frozen, too terrified to even breathe. The light from my flashlight wavered in my shaking hands as I tried to process what I was seeing. There was no mistaking it. This thing wasn't some animal or wild creature. It was something far worse, something far older. And it had seen me. The creature let out a shriek, a high-pitched, piercing scream that rattled through my skull, making my ears feel like they were going to burst. It was a sound so unnatural, so horrible, that I thought I might lose my hearing entirely. Before I could even react, the thing launched itself toward me with terrifying speed. I fumbled for my gun, my heart hammering in my chest as I drew it. My hands were shaking, but I forced them steady. As it closed, I fired. The first shot hit its shoulder, but the beast didn't falter. I squeezed off another shot, and this time the bullet slammed into its massive chest. The creature stopped, its body jerking back from the impact, a gravelly cry of pain escaping its monstrous mouth. For a moment I thought it might charge again, but instead it turned and fled into the woods. The sound of its massive frame crashing through the trees, snapping branches and uprooting saplings echoed long after it had disappeared. I stood there frozen, my breath ragged in my chest, the adrenaline surging through me. My heart pounded in my ears as I listened for any sign of it returning. Silence. Nothing but the faint rustle of the wind. I slowly lowered my gun, still on edge. I glanced back at the hiker's remains, his torn body, a horrible reminder of the nightmare this forest had become. The peaceful trails I had once loved were now tainted with blood, with terror. The weight of what had just happened crashed down on me. I forced myself to take note of my location, marking the spot where the creature had attacked. I wasn't about to leave the area unguarded, but I had to get back to the station to report what had happened. With slow, deliberate steps, I began making my way back, keeping my gun drawn. My senses heightened. Every shadow in the forest seemed to move. Every sound felt like a threat. The night had become a living nightmare. I couldn't shake the feeling that something else was watching me, waiting for its chance. I arrived back at the station, every muscle in my body tight with tension, but nothing compared to the relief I felt when I stepped inside. The lights flickering on and casting a warm glow over the walls. I reported everything to my superior. Every detail of the creature, the screams, the blood, the way it had attacked the hiker. He didn't question me, he didn't even seem surprised. He just took it in, growing pale as I spoke. By the time I finished, it was already 9 p.m. He apologized, told me I'd have to stay put and give my statement to the authorities. I nodded absently, too tired to argue. It didn't matter to me how long I had to wait. I was back in the safety of the station, out of the woods, away from that thing. The night dragged on in a haze of exhaustion and dread. My mind couldn't shake the image of the creature, its monstrous form, the way it had looked at me with those empty, bloodshot eyes. I kept telling myself that I was safe now, that nothing could touch me here. And when the vehicles finally arrived, my relief turned to confusion. I had been expecting local police, maybe an ambulance for the poor hiker, but what I saw instead made my blood run cold. 2 black subs pulled up to the station, their tires crunching on the gravel as they came to a halt. The men who stepped out weren't in uniform. They wore sharp black clothing, sleek and professional, their faces hidden behind dark sunglasses despite the late hour. They moved with a quiet, deliberate precision, like wolves hunting in the night. I felt a chill crawl down my spine as one of the men approached. He didn't introduce himself, didn't offer a hand, just stared at me for a moment, his eyes hidden behind dark glasses. "Are you the ranger who encountered it?" He asked in a voice that was too calm, too controlled. I nodded, unsure of what to make of him, of them. "Good," he said, turning back to his colleagues. "Well, we'll take it from here." It wasn't until then that I realized what was happening. These weren't local authorities. They weren't even from around here. Their presence, their demeanor was unsettling, like they had known this was coming, like they had been waiting for someone like me to find the creature. And now that I had, they were going to take control of everything. I stayed silent, my mind racing with questions. But before I could say anything, the man spoke again. "More statement will be taken. You will be briefed later. We handle things like this." I felt a sinking feeling in my stomach. There was no room for questions, no room for doubt. They had been waiting for this. Whatever this thing was, it was something more than just a creature in the woods. And I had no idea how deep it went. After giving my statement, I tried to ask them questions. I needed answers, needed to understand what was going on. But each of them just looked at me, stoic, emotionless, like they had heard it all before. Their eyes were cold, unreadable. They said nothing. Instead, one of the men reached into his jacket and pulled out a document, sliding it across the table toward me. It was a non-disclosure agreement. An NDA. The words on the paper blurred together as I tried to read, but I could barely focus. They wanted me to sign it. To keep everything I had seen, everything I had learned a secret. Forever I stared at the document, my hands shaking. I didn't want to sign it. I couldn't. But the way they looked at me, the way their eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that spoke of things far darker than I could understand, told me I had no choice. The weight of their silence hung heavy in the air. They weren't asking, they were telling. I took the pen. My fingers trembled as I signed the paper, each stroke of ink feeling like a surrender, a piece of my soul being locked away. The man nodded as I finished sliding the document back into his folder without a word, but then he handed me another piece of paper. This one was different. It had details written in tight, precise handwriting, a story for me to tell, one that would be fed to the authorities if I ever dared to speak the truth. The man suffered a bear attack. I arrived too late to stop it. That's what I was supposed to say. Nothing about the creature, nothing about the blood, the screams, the twisted horror I had witnessed. I looked down at the paper, a sickening twist in my stomach. The lie was laid out in front of me, and it had tasted like metal on my tongue. I was supposed to accept it. I had no choice but to accept it. I nodded, and my voice caught in my throat as I silently accepted the agreement. I wasn't sure what was worse, the horror of what I had seen, or the realization that I was now a part of something far bigger than I could ever understand. And I was expected to stay silent, to forget. But I couldn't. Not completely. Something in me refused to believe that this was over. After that night, I quit being a ranger. I couldn't stay in that job anymore, not after everything. I had seen everything I had been forced to bury. I tried to move on to forget, but the nightmares never stopped. Sometimes I lie awake in the dark, hearing the man's awful screams echoing in my head. I see the creature, its massive blood-soaked mouth, chewing through his thigh bone like it was nothing more than a twig. The sound of it still haunts me. What breaks me even more is the thought of that man's poor wife never knowing the truth of what happened to her husband. I can still hear her voice on the phone, frantic with worry. Revolt gnaws at me because I couldn't give her the closure she deserved. She'll never know what really happened, and that thought weighs on me more than anything else. I used to love the woods. I was an avid hiker, a lover of wildlife and nature. The forest was a sanctuary for me. But now, after what I saw, I can never look at it the same way again. The smell of pine and damp earth now just reminds me of the blood and the hunger lurking in the shadows. I'm writing this now, trying to finally get it out of my head because I can't live with the images anymore. I fear they'll find out I've breached the NDA, and when they do, I know they'll come after me. They don't let people like me talk, but I can't keep living with this torment. If you're reading this, stay out of the forest. Please. It's not what it seems. And if you must go, be sure to go armed. You never know what might be lurking out there waiting for you. It's not just the trees that can hurt you. The woods are full of things that should never be seen, things that are better left undiscovered. I just read one of the stories you blogged about Faye. I wanted to give a brief report of my encounter. I saw a brownie. It was about 2 inches long and tall, humanoid, but walked on all fours with brown skin, brown clothes, and brown hair. It was walking on the floor and under my sister's bed. I jumped and screamed. I asked if they had weird bugs in the area or any pets. She said no. Of course, it was gone a second later. I later saw one that had autumn-colored feathery wings under a different bed in the same house. It was also crawling on all four, and I only saw the wing. It was also gone a moment later, and there was nothing under the bed with those colors. In the woods surrounding the house, we often heard the soft sound of tiny bells and quiet giggles from the trees. In a nearby cemetery, while visiting my grandpa's grave, a small, pale, flying humanoid zoomed past my head and into the woods. I wanted to ask you if you think that these Fae are attracted to certain people. I find it fascinating when you theorize that the Chicago winged humanoids may show themselves to certain people. I wonder if the same may apply to Fae. All my experiences took place in Wilmington, North Carolina, near the oceanfront. I want to share a real experience that I had about 7 years ago. This might not be as interesting as it could be, because it's real. I'm not trying to make things up for the sake of entertainment. I just want to get this off my chest, as it was one of the most traumatic experiences of my life. Around the age of 19, I was disqualified from the military due to a medical disqualification. I wasn't too sure what to do with my life. Since this was a lifelong dream, I felt very lost. I did a lot of soul searching during this time, studied many religions and philosophies. At some point I got into occultism, law of attraction, meditation, and finally astral projection. To keep it short, I started meditating to attract into my life the things I wanted. I also started to practice astral projection. After a few weeks, my aunt started to come into my room scared and began to question what I was doing. I told her I was meditating quite frequently, sometimes up to 3 a day. Why was she asking? She told me that something very weird had just happened in the house. In fact, for a few days now, several weird things had been happening. She told me while they were watching TV, the front door of the house unlocked itself and the door had just been slammed open. They told me things had been falling off counters and my uncle was seeing things from the corner of his eyes. She didn't ask me to stop. She actually seemed intrigued. My aunt is into crystals and, all kinds of groovy do stuff. I kept this going. I wasn't able to astral project yet, but I was able to get parts of my body to leave, as weird as that sounds. I was able to remove my arm from my arm. It's a very odd feeling to describe. It feels like your arms is paralyzed, yet another one you can fully manipulate and feel is coming out of it. I was also able to do this with my right leg. For those who are not understanding what astral projection is, it means leaving your body. I'm not sure if your soul leaves your body or if you project it mentally. All I know is it's very real. I'm not here to persuade you one way or the other, but it's thing. Supposedly you are able to soul travel by doing this. In any case, a couple weeks go by and my uncle and aunt need to be gone for a couple days, and I have the house for myself. So what do? Have a girl over, like any normal dude would. I meditate and try to leave my body by this point. I'm obsessed. For the first time, I fall asleep while meditating, and what proceeds to happen is one of the most traumatic and terrifying things to ever happen to me. Where am I kidding? It's by far the most terrifying experience of my life, and it haunts me to this day. This is the part of the story I don't like telling anyone, because they dismiss it as a nightmare or it's just sleep paralysis, bro. I don't care what you decide to call what I'm about to tell you. If you want to label it as fake, it was more real than life to me. I have astral projected a few times. I never saw anything very interesting other than my own home freaking out my dogs. And mostly what I do is fly over lakes, factories at night, the city. I can never do it for very long. I have not mastered it, and nowadays I avoid the practice altogether, although it happens involuntarily still from time to time. What I experienced in this instance was different. It felt more physical, it felt more real, and I was attacked by God knows what. I wake up laying flat on my bed facing up, arms wide open and legs spread apart. The TV is on. The show Ink Master is running. It's night, but the room has a natural light to it, almost like a full moon. I see a shadow in the corner of the room. I try to get up, but I can't move. I'm paralyzed. I start being able to move, but I feel heavy, like trying to swim underwater. The shadow gets closer to me and then crawls on top of my body. This is embarrassing to say, and I normally leave this part out of the story. This thing proceeds to put its hands between my legs and press and squeeze. I feel immense physical pain. There is actually something griping my body and really hurting me. I try to scream, but I can't. I start saying, "The power of Christ compels you," over and over, but it does nothing. My back starts to bend in an arch, and I'm slightly levitating over my bed. Everything is happening very silently, which allows me to hear loud footsteps coming from the kitchen. While all of this is happening, a man walks from the kitchen into my room. I can barely see a look, but he's a middle-aged man wearing a suit that looks very old-fashioned. After several attempts to ask, my words finally come out. "Who are you?" The man standing in the corner of my room states, "My name is Lucifer." I then ask, concerned, "Lucifer?" He states, "No, Lucifer." The painful arching and floating continue for a while until suddenly they stop. I fall onto my bed and it's suddenly daylight. Ink Master is still on and I can hear birds chirping. I never woke up from this like waking up from a dream. It simply stopped and I was still awake. I spent the entire day looking things up online trying to make sense of what happened. When night came again, the same thing happens again. This entity, or whatever it is, grips me the same way and hurts me. You have to understand that the pain is very physical and excruciating. I can feel its hands and fingers, and this time I'm very pissed off. For one reason or another, I'm not afraid, and I start trying to strangle it. I start asking it, get me out of my body so I can kill it. And suddenly it all stops just like that. After this second episode, it never happened again. From time to time, I am still attacked by an entity that looks like me, and I'm forced to fight it. But these are more like vivid nightmares. Nothing is like the situation I just described. I quit meditating, I quit trying to astral project, and this situation never happened again. I still involuntarily astral project in my sleep sometimes, but it's very uneventful. I don't see other entities or have bad or good things happen. I just float over a lake near my house and enjoy the view for the most part. Maybe there's more I could share, but I think I've shared enough. Thanks for getting this far. I never found out who Lucer was. I tried to figure it out. Well, for those who have asked if the Lucer entity was helping or not, I have no idea. I've spent years trying to figure out who that was and looking through my ancestry to see if it was a relative. Nothing. His energy didn't seem negative at all, but neither did it seem to be benevolent. It didn't seem like he was involved in it in any way. It seemed like just someone passing by who saw all of this happening.
I don't know.
Feel free to ask questions. It doesn't bother me. The first time I arrived at the ranger station, it was colder than I expected, not just temperature-wise, but in a way that seeped into your bones, making every movement seem slower and more deliberate. The Cascade Mountains in Washington were notorious for their isolation, but I didn't mind it, at least not at first. I'd been a park ranger for years, used to the quiet hum of nature, the stillness that could either soothe or unsettle. But this place felt different. It wasn't just the snow-capped peaks or the way the trees seemed to close in on themselves. It was the weight of the silence. It had a presence, like something where someone was waiting for me. Not exactly a welcome party, I muttered under my breath, dragging my duffel bag inside and locking the door behind me. My job here was simple enough: monitor the station, log wildlife activity, and make sure no one wandered onto closed trails. The locals told me it was a ghost town during the off-season, and I believed it. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I hadn't been here long when I found the first sign that something was wrong. It was a hiker's boot, half buried in the snow, the heels scuffed as though someone had run, and then just stopped. No tracks leading away from it, just an empty boot, left like a cruel reminder. I had learned about disappearances in this area, heard rumors about people vanishing without a trace, but I always thought it was just part of the job. People got lost, nature swallowed them whole. But the more I walked the forest and the more I stayed in the station, the more I started to question if there was something else at play. Something beyond the usual tragedies. I sat at my desk, eyes glued to the thick file of missing persons cases, trying to make sense of it. All the disappearances were in the same area, the same stretch of the mountain. No signs of struggle. Just their boots, sometimes backpacks, and occasionally strange symbols carved into tree trunks. I shook my head, a shiver crawling up my spine. I had always prided myself on being a man of reason, but out here, the rules didn't seem to apply. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the snow-covered ground outside the station. I hadn't planned on going back out that night, but something nodded at me, something in the back of my mind that wouldn't let me rest. So, against my better judgment, I grabbed my flashlight, strapped on my jacket, and decided to check the area where I found the boot earlier. The forest felt different at night, like the trees themselves were holding their breath watching. Every step I took seemed to echo. Through the stillness, the crunch of snow beneath my boots, the only sound that dared break the silence. I made my way along the unofficial trail, the one I'd come across earlier, and that's when I saw it. A shirt caught on a low-hanging branch, stained dark red and still damp, despite the freezing temperatures. I stopped cold staring at it for a long moment. It didn't make sense. The area had been cleared by the storm yesterday. No one had been around for days. I approached cautiously, but there was something about the shirt, something about the way it seemed to almost shimmer like it was out of place. It wasn't just the blood, it was the absence of it. I couldn't explain it. The moment I reached out to touch it, a sudden crack from the woods behind me made my heart lurch. Whipping around, my flashlight swept through the trees, but there was nothing. Not a sound, not a movement, just the unnatural quiet. I stood there for a long moment trying to steady my breath. The shirt was still in my hand, the blood still fresh, but it wasn't the blood that sent chills down my spine. It was the footprints I saw next. They were right beside me, a trail leading off into the trees. The prints were large, heavy, too big to be from a human, but not like any animal tracks I knew. They were fresh, but they didn't lead anywhere, they just stopped. I turned, scanning the area around me, trying to make sense of it, but the forest was silent, too silent, like it was waiting for something to happen. And then I felt it, the presence, the sensation of being watched. Someone or something was out there. I didn't waste any more time. I turned and hurried back to the station, my mind racing. The shirt, the footprints, none of it made sense. It was like something was playing a game with me, taunting me, pulling me deeper into the woods, into whatever madness lurked there. My only choice was to get back to the safety of the station and figure out what the hell was going on. The door slammed behind me as I entered. A gust of wind outside pushed it shut with an unnatural force. My hand shook as I locked it. The weight of the forest pressed in on me. The radio sat on the counter, an old thing that had seen better days. I'd been keeping it on just in case. But tonight, as I sat down to take stock of the situation, I noticed something strange. Static. At first I thought it was just a malfunction, but the static morphed, deepened. I reached for the dial, ready to turn it off, when I heard it. A whisper, soft at first, like the wind rustling through the trees. Leave now. My blood ran cold. I couldn't move. I just sat there staring at the radio like it might explode. The whisper came again, louder this time, but more frantic. You won't make it out. I swallowed hard, my throat dry as dust. My mind raced. Was this a prank? A joke from the rangers on the other side of the mountain? Or was I losing my mind? I grabbed my personal phone from the table. No signal out here, so I didn't expect much, but I felt the need to check it anyway. The screen flickered to life, but the only notification was a single text. It was from an unknown number. They know you're here. I stared at the message for what felt like an eternity. My fingers hovered over the screen, unsure of what to do. Was this a coincidence? Someone playing games trying to freak me out? Or was this something far worse than a prank? I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, and I knew deep down that I wasn't alone. Something was watching me, and it wasn't going to stop until I was gone. I spent the next few hours in a daze, pacing around the station, my mind struggling to make sense of what was happening. The message on my phone, the voice on the radio. It was all too much, but I knew I had to get a grip. There was something happening in these woods. Something that was tied to the missing hikers, the blood-stained shirt, the strange footprints. I tried to distract myself by going over the old case files I had on hand. There were so many disappearances in this area, but one kept catching my eye. A hiker who had vanished just 2 weeks ago. His name was Garrett Finley, a college student who had come here to hike alone. His family had been frantic when he didn't return, and his last known location was the very trail I'd found the bloodstained shirt on. I couldn't help myself. I had to check out his last known campsite. The idea of finding a clue, something concrete, was the only thing keeping me from losing my mind. So I grabbed my gear and set out. It didn't take long to reach the site. The fire pit was still there, cold and abandoned. A torn-up tarp was strung between a couple of trees, and it was clear that someone had stayed here recently. But what really caught my attention was the trail camera. It was hidden in the branches of a large pine tree, almost perfectly camouflaged. I hadn't seen it earlier when I was out here. Was it Garrett's? Who had set it up? I felt a knot form in my stomach as I carefully removed the camera from its perch, my fingers trembling as I plugged it into my laptop. The screen flickered as the footage loaded. At first, it was just a man sitting by a fire. His face was illuminated by the flickering flames. He looked young, probably around my age. But what struck me was the terror in his eyes. He kept glancing nervously over his shoulder as though expecting something to emerge from the darkness. And then I saw it. The thing that made my heart stop. Behind him, just beyond the firelight, was a figure. It was blurry at first, but the more I focused, the clearer it became. A humanoid shape, its features distorted and stretched, barely holding onto its form. It was like something between the living and the dead, a grotesque shadow flickering in and out of existence. The footage took a sharp turn. Garrett, looking directly at the camera, muttered something under his breath, too quiet to make out. Then, in a sudden burst of panic, he lunged at the camera as if to stop it from recording. The footage ended in static, leaving me staring at the screen in disbelief. This wasn't just some urban legend or ghost story. Something was out there and it was hunting people, us. I was next. I couldn't sleep that night. The video replayed in my mind over and over again, the twisted figure lurking just beyond the firelight and Garrett's panic whisper before the static took over. It was no longer a question of whether something was out there. I knew it was. I had seen it with my own eyes. But what was it? And why was it hunting hikers in this cursed part of the wood? I spent the following day poring through old case files in a frantic search for any connection between the disappearances, and then I found it. A name buried deep in the reports. A serial killer who terrorized the area in the late... His name was Thomas Leland, a man with a twisted history who lured hikers deep into the forest, murdered them, and left their bodies as offerings at an ancient stone circle. The reports were vague, mentioning a string of murders and disappearances, but there was something else that unsettled. The locals believed that Leland's victims hadn't truly died. They claimed that their spirits were trapped in the forest, unable to rest because their killer was never caught. Over time, these spirits had twisted into something darker and vengeful, phantoms that hunted the living, bound to the woods where they had been slain. It was insane. The idea that the spirits of these victims were still out there haunting the forest sounded like something out of a nightmare. But the more I thought about it, the more it seemed to make sense. The missing hikers, the blood-stained shirt, the cryptic messages carved into trees, everything pointed back to Leland's legacy. The forest was cursed, a present from the souls of the murdered. It was reaching out to claim more. The radio crackled again, pulling me out of my thoughts. I grabbed it in my hand, shaking as I listened. "You're in my woods now." It was him. It had to be. The voice was deep, raspy, and full of malice. And it was calling from the woods, from the thing that had been hunting me since I arrived. My heart pounded in my chest as I stood there, the weight of the forest pressing in on me. I wasn't alone, it was closing in, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I had to act. I had to end this before it was too late. But the question was how? How could I fight something that wasn't even alive? How could I escape a forest that had become a prison where the dead walked among the living? The answer came to me then. A ritual, an old legend from the local tribe. They had a way of trapping vengeful spirits, binding them to the earth, keeping them from ever escaping. It was the only chance I had. With the plan in mind, I gathered my things and prepared to venture back into the woods. This time I wasn't just running from what hunted me. I was going to face it head on. I had to. The souls of the dead weren't the only ones trapped here. I was too. And if I didn't stop it, I'd become just another victim. But what if the ritual didn't work? What if it made things worse? I couldn't afford to think like that. I had to keep moving. I took one last breath before stepping out into the darkening forest, the cold air biting at my skin. My flashlight flickered as I walked the beam, casting long shadows against the trees. The familiar path had transformed overnight. The same woods that had seemed mundane and welcoming on my first visit now felt like a labyrinth of dread, each turn hiding something I wasn't ready to face. The blood-stained shirt was still tucked into my pack, the key to the ritual, the bait that would draw the spirits and wraiths to the ancient stone circle. I had to keep reminding myself of that as I moved deeper into the forest. A filler clawing at my chest threatened to overwhelm me, but I forced it back. I wasn't just walking into the dark, I was walking toward my salvation. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time felt irrelevant here. The trees loomed tall and silent, and the only sound was the crunch of leaves beneath my boots. The deeper I went, the more it felt like the forest itself was watching me, its eyes hidden in the shadows, waiting for me to make a mistake. And just as I was starting to doubt myself, I saw it. A stone circle. It rose from the forest floor, ancient and forgotten, covered in moss and overgrown with vines. I could feel the weight of it in my bones. This was where it had all started. The murders, the disappearances, the curse that had tainted this place for decades. And now it was where it would end. I took a few hesitant steps toward the center, my flashlight dancing across the jagged stones. There, in the middle of the circle, I placed the blood-stained shirt on the ground. The ritual required an offering to lure the spirits and draw them into the trap. It wasn't enough to just be here, I had to call them. "Come," I whispered, my voice shaking. "Come and finish what you started." The air grew colder, the wind picking up in a rush, howling through the trees. The forest seemed to hold its breath. And then I saw them, the figures in the shadows, pale gods, their eyes dark and empty. They stood just beyond the ring of stones, watching me with vacant stares. The vanished hikers. Their forms flickered, their movements jerky and unnatural. They were trapped, just like me. And they were angry, but there was something else. The figure stepped forward, its presence chilling me to the bone. It was Thomas Leland, or at least it looked like him. His face was twisted, his body stretched and distorted, his grin wide and sickening. He wasn't human anymore. He was a wraith. A thing that had clawed its way out of the grave, seeking vengeance on those who dared to enter his domain. I took a step back, my hand reaching for the matches I had stashed in my pocket. The ritual required fire a circle of flames to trap the spirits and bind them to the earth. I wasn't sure if it would work, but I had no other choice. With trembling hands, I struck a match and lit the first pile of kindling, the flames licking the air. One by one, I set the rest of the wood alight until the fire surrounded the stone circle, crackling and hissing in the dark. The spirits shrieked, their forms twisting in agony as though the flames were searing them. The lane's wraith howled, his body flickering in and out of existence, his face contorted in a final desperate scream. The forest shook. The ground beneath me trembled, as if the earth itself were rebelling. The spirits tried to escape, but the fire was too strong. Leland's wraith lunged at me, but I stood firm, watching as the flames consumed him. His body collapsed, disintegrating into a mass of swirling darkness and bones, until nothing remained but the echo of his fury, and then silence. The forest had reclaimed its dead. The spirits were gone, the curse was broken. I collapsed to my knees, exhausted, my heart pounding in my chest. The air felt lighter, freer. The oppressive weight that had pressed down on me since my arrival was gone. My name is Rick Andrews, and I've been a park ranger in Alaska for close to 12 years now. The job was supposed to be simple, a life among the towering pines and snow-capped peaks far from the noise of civilization. I'd grown up with a love for the wilderness, and this was my dream, or at least I thought it was. What I didn't expect were the things I would see, things that go beyond logic, beyond reason. This wasn't what they told me about when I signed up. I was stationed at Denali National Park, a place so vast and isolated it's easy to forget the world exists beyond its borders. The animals were the usual suspects: moose, wolves, and bears, always keeping their distance. But it wasn't the animals that had me worried. It was something else, something watching, something I couldn't explain. My partner, Sarah, had started talking about it too. She'd heard things at night. Footsteps crunching in the snow, low growls from somewhere in the dark. I told her it was just the wind or maybe a bear, but deep down I wasn't so sure anymore. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, Sarah and I were called to investigate a disturbance near the farthest reaches of the park, a dense forest area where few people ventured. When we arrived, we found nothing but overturned trees and claw marks etched deep into the trunks. Bear? Sarah asked, but I shook my head. The marks were too high up, far beyond any bear's reach, and there was no scent, no tracks leading away. It didn't make sense. We stood there for what felt like hours, the silence almost oppressive. Then I heard a rustling in the brush just beyond the tree line. I told Sarah to stay put. While I crept closer, my flashlight casting long, jittery shadows across the undergrowth. That's when I saw it. Two glowing eyes staring back at me from the darkness. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. My heart thudded painfully in my chest, and I felt a cold sweat break out along my spine. Then the eyes vanished. No sound, no movement. Just the absence of it. What the hell was that? Sarah whispered, her voice shaky. She had crept up behind me and I hadn't even heard her. I don't know. I muttered, trying to calm my racing thoughts, but I'm not sticking around to find out. I turned quickly, but as we walked back to the truck, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig underfoot sent my nerves into overdrive. There was something out there, something that was neither animal nor man. By the time we reached the truck, the air felt charged thick with an unspoken dread. As I started the engine, I glanced over at Sarah, who was staring out the window, her face pale. "We need to report this," she said, though I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. "I will," I replied. Deep down I knew the park wouldn't take it seriously. I never did when it came to things like this. I wasn't sure I believed it myself, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized one thing: the park had been hiding something big. The next few days felt like a blur. Sarah and I didn't speak much about what had happened. We both pretended like everything was normal, but it wasn't. I kept running over the events in my mind, trying to make sense of them. Whatever we had seen, it wasn't like anything I had encountered in all my years in the field. The park had its share of strange occurrences, mysterious noises, unexplainable tracks, but this was different. This felt real. I spent the next few days on edge. Every crack in the trees, every rustle of leaves seemed to pull my attention. I couldn't shake the image of those glowing eyes from my mind in the silence. That profound, suffocating silence when it vanished. It was like something was watching us, waiting for the right moment to strike. It wasn't paranoia. It was instinct. And that instinct was telling me that whatever was out there was no longer just a curiosity. It was a threat. Sarah and I were out on patrol again when we came across something that would make the hairs on the back of anyone's neck stand up. A trail that didn't belong to anything I'd seen before. The tracks were too large to be from any bear or moose. They were deep, as if something heavy had walked through the snow. But the shape was wrong. Too wide, too long. At first glance, I thought it was a trick of the light. Maybe a trick of my mind, but the closer we got, the more I realized how wrong I was. I knelt down beside one of the prints, studying it closely. "This doesn't make any sense," I muttered to myself. "Whatever made, these is huge, and I mean huge. The tracks were at least 1.5 feet long, and the toes they weren't like anything I had ever seen. They were blunt, almost like a human's, but something was off. "I don't like this," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. She looked around nervously, her eyes darting from tree to tree. "Rick, what if it's the thing we saw?" I stood up, brushing the snow off my gloves. "It might be, but we need to find out for sure." The further we followed the trail, the deeper it led into the forest, away from the paths we knew. The air grew colder, the silence more oppressive. It was as if the forest was holding its breath, waiting for something. We pressed on with our flashlights, cutting narrow beams through the dark. Eventually we came to a clearing. It was small, and in the center of it something lay on the ground. I stopped in my tracks. My heart skipped a beat. There in the snow was a body, a deer, but not just any deer. Its body was twisted, contorted in a way that made my stomach churn. Its eyes were wide open, frozen in a look of terror. The wounds, I couldn't even comprehend them. There were deep gouging marks along its body, as if something with claws had torn it apart. "Or did they?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. I didn't have an answer, but as I looked around the clearing, I could feel it. The weight of something just beyond our sights, something massive and unnatural watching us. "We need to go," I said it, my voice low now. But before we could turn around, the wind picked up, carrying with it a low growl. It was deep and sounded too close for comfort. The growl echoed through the trees, a primal sound that seemed to vibrate in my chest. My heart pounded as Sarah and I froze, our eyes scanning the shadows, searching for the source. The wind howled, carrying with it the scent of something foul like wet earth and decay. It was then that I realized how truly alone we were out here. The forest had gone still, too. Still no birds, no rustling of leaves, just the cold breath of something in the dark. "Rick," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "What the hell is that?" "I don't know," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "But we need to move now." We began to backtrack slowly, never taking our eyes off the tree line. The growl came again, louder, this time closer. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, a creeping sense of dread settling over me. I had no idea what we were dealing with, but it wasn't something I had ever encountered before. No bear, no wolf, no moose made that kind of sound. Suddenly there was a snap of branches behind us. We both spun around in unison, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. But there was nothing there. Just the trees, empty, silent trees. I could feel Sarah's hand tighten around mine, and I didn't blame her. Fear had a way of making the rational mind falter, and right now, all I wanted to do was run. But we could not yet. "Stay calm," I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I was trying to reassure her or myself. "We just need to get back to the truck. It's not far." We turned and started moving again, faster now, our boots crunching in the snow as we made our way back toward the clearing. But the further we went, the more wrong things felt. The woods seemed to close in around us, the trees leaning in as if trying to trap us. The air grew colder, the temperature dropping with each step. I glanced over at Sarah, her face pale in the light of the flashlight. "You okay?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "No," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Rick, something's out there. It's following us." I didn't need her to say it. I could feel it, too. The heavy presence that lurked just beyond our sight, the way the shadows moved in the corners of my vision, the feeling of being watched. I knew what I had seen, and I knew what we were up against. This wasn't just some animal, it was something bigger, something older, something that had no place in this world. We reached the edge of the clearing, and I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The truck was in sight just beyond the trees, but as we hurried toward it, the ground beneath us trembled slightly. A low rumble like something heavy moving through the earth, and then, without warning, the sky was filled with a loud, blood-curdling roar. It was the sound of something ancient, something that didn't belong in the world of man. The roar shook the air around us, vibrating in my bones, and I realized with a sickening jolt that whatever it was closing in. We ran. There was no thought, no hesitation, just instinct pushing us forward, our legs burning as we sprinted toward the truck. The roar echoed in the distance, so loud and primal that I could feel it in my chest like an earthquake trembling through the ground. I didn't look back. I didn't want to know what was behind us. All I knew was that we had to get to the truck to safety. Go, 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 Sarah shouted, her voice high-pitched with panic as she pushed me ahead, her hands still gripping mine tightly. I could hear the crunch of snow behind us, heavier, now closer. The sound of something large, something fast, chasing us. The truck was only a few hundred yards away, but with every step the distance seemed to grow. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was out there was faster than us, more determined. My flashlight flickered as I ran, casting long, shaky beams of light across the dark landscape. Every shadow seemed to move. Every crack in the trees felt like an ambush waiting to happen. We were surrounded. When we finally reached the truck, I fumbled with the keys, my hands trembling so violently that I could barely get the damn thing into the ignition. Sarah was already in the passenger seat, her face pale and eyes wide with terror, but she didn't say anything. She didn't need to. We both knew something terrible was out there, something that was hunting us. The roar came again, this time so close it seemed to vibrate the air around us. Finally, the truck roared to life. I slammed the gear shift into drive and floored the accelerator, the tires spinning as we tore through the snow and back onto the path leading out of the park. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I didn't want to, but the feeling of being hunted, of something closing in, wouldn't leave me. It gnawed at my mind, tightening with every passing second. "Rick, what the hell was that?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling, but still laced with disbelief. "That thing, it wasn't a bear, it wasn't anything we've ever seen." I know, I said, my throat tight. It wasn't anything normal. I don't know what it is, but it's not alone. There's more out there, I can feel it. The truck bounced over the rough terrain, the headlights illuminating. Nothing but trees and snow. The wind howled and the world outside felt like a void, a black hole waiting to swallow us whole. But then, just as quickly as it had started, the pursuit stopped. The crunching of snow behind us faded and the night fell eerily silent again. I glanced over at Sarah. She was staring ahead, her eyes wide filled with fear. "Do you think we lost it?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "I don't know," I said, my voice hoarse, "but we're not going to stick around to find out." As I drove faster, my mind raced. I had no answers, no explanation for what we just encountered. There had to be something, though, something we were missing. The park had always been full of strange stories, of creatures lurking in the woods, of things people couldn't explain, but I never thought it would be real. Now I wasn't so sure anymore, and neither was Sarah. "We need to warn the others," she said, finally speaking again. "Rick, the park. It's not safe anymore. If that thing is out there, it's only a matter of time before someone else sees it." I didn't answer right away, I couldn't. The thought of going back, of returning to that hellish forest, made my stomach churn. But Sarah was right. We couldn't let this go. We had to get the mart out, no matter the cost. We didn't talk much after that. The drive back to the ranger station felt like it took hours, the weight of the night pressing down on us, turning every passing minute into an eternity. I kept my eyes on the road, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles ached. Every shadow felt like a threat, and every gust of wind like a whisper of something following us. By the time we reached the station, it was well past midnight. The station was dark, lit only by the faint glow of the security lights outside. I parked the truck in front, and we got out, making our way quickly inside. The silence of the place was suffocating. Sarah and I hadn't said a word since we arrived, but I knew what we both were thinking. Who would believe us? Inside the station, I tried to shake off the unease, but it stuck to me like cold sweat. The walls felt closer now, as though the space had shrunk since I'd last been here. I went straight for the radio, hoping to reach anyone at the nearby outpost, but the static crackling back at me made it clear that we were alone. No, help would not be coming. The weight of isolation settled in again. We need to go public. Sarah finally spoke, her voice strained with fear and resolve. We can't just sit on this. We can pretend like it didn't happen. I shook my head, pacing the small office. If we tell anyone, they'll think we're crazy. They won't believe us. They'll cover it up. Like they always do with stuff like this. But we saw something real. She insisted, her voice breaking. And it's still out there. What if it attacks someone else? What if? I know, I cut her off. But we're not in a position to do anything. Not yet. A heavy silence filled the room as Sarah sat down at the desk, rubbing her temples. I don't care what they say, she muttered almost to herself. I'm reporting it. We have to let people know. I can't just pretend like everything's fine, not after what we saw. I ran a hand through my hair, exhaling sharply. Sarah, I get it, but we need to think this through. If we make the wrong move, we could make it worse. We could be putting ourselves and everyone else in danger. It was then that I heard something, a sound from outside, a faint rustling like footsteps in the snow. I froze, my heart racing. It was too quiet, too deliberate. I stood up slowly, making my way toward the window, my hand trembling as I pulled back the blinds. Outside, standing in the shadow of the trees, was a figure, a tall, hulking silhouette that towered over the surrounding foliage. Its body was covered in something dark, something that blended seamlessly into the night. I couldn't make out details, but I could feel its eyes on me. I could feel the weight of its gaze, cold and unblinking. Rick, Sarah whispered, her voice shaking. What is that? I didn't answer. I couldn't. I just watched as the figure stood still, not moving, not making a sound. And then it was gone, vanished into the night, leaving nothing behind but the eerie silence. We need to get out of here, I said, my voice low and urgent. Now we didn't waste any time. The moment that figure disappeared into the trees, I grabbed Sarah's arm and pulled her toward the door. There was no more hesitation, no more planning. Whatever that thing was, it was out there, and it wasn't waiting for us to make up our minds. We scrambled into the truck, my mind racing as I shoved the keys into the ignition and slammed the gear shift into drive. The truck roared to life, the engine vibrating through my hands as I pulled away from the station. The forest loomed on either side of us, dark and oppressive, as though it was closing in, swallowing the road whole. We were heading out, but I knew we weren't safe. Not yet. Rick, we have to tell someone. We can keep this to ourselves, Sarah said, her voice strained. I glanced over at her, her face pale in the dim light. She was terrified. I could see it, but there was something else in her eyes too, something determined. I know, I replied, my voice low and tense. But not yet. We need more proof. We can't go in half-cocked. The truck bounced over the rough road, the headlights illuminating only the nearest trees, casting long, eerie shadows that seemed to stretch toward us. I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something following us, but the road behind us remained empty. That wasn't much of a relief. The silence was worse. I didn't know what I expected to find in the forest. Maybe I thought that if we stayed on the move long enough, whatever was out there would leave us alone. But deep down I knew that wasn't going to happen. Whatever it was, whatever had been stalking us, wasn't just going to disappear. The night dragged on in heavy, suffocating silence, each minute stretching longer than the last. I had no idea where we were going, just that I needed to put distance between us and whatever that creature was. But as we rounded a corner, something caught my eye. A shape in the distance standing at the edge of the trees, watching us. It was the same hulking figure, standing motionless, its eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. I slammed on the brakes, and the truck skidded to a halt. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah," Sarah replied, her breath coming in quick gasps. It's the same thing. It's watching us. I didn't want to stop. I didn't want to face whatever was out there, but I couldn't keep driving in circles. "We need to get out of here," I said, my hands shaking as I turned the key in the ignition and started backing up. But the moment I did, the figure stepped forward, its large frame emerging from the shadows. I could feel it now, the heavy, suffocating presence. It wasn't alone anymore. I could hear movement all around us, footsteps in the snow, the sound of something large approaching. My heart hammered in my chest as I threw the truck into reverse, my foot pressing down hard on the gas. We were being surrounded, but then just as quickly as it had started, the sound stopped. The figure retreated into the darkness, vanishing like a shadow. "Rick, what the hell just happened?" Sarah whispered, her voice shaking. "I don't know," I said. "Bloodline really. But we're not staying here, not for one more second." We drove for hours, heading deeper into the wilderness, away from the park, away from whatever it was that had been hunting us. But even as the sun began to rise, I knew that whatever we'd seen was still out there and it wasn't finished with us yet. I had no answers, no solutions. Only one thing was certain: we couldn't hide forever. We never made it to safety. Not really. Oh, we found a place to lay low for a while. A small cabin, miles from any other person. But it was never enough. The creature, or whatever it was, kept its distance at first. It seemed to be watching, waiting, but I could feel it always. Even when we thought we were alone, when the nights were quiet and still, I felt those eyes. The weight of them on the back of my neck, like a hunter waiting to strike. We tried everything. We called in people from the park, from the government, and even the media, but no one believed us. Not at first. They wrote it off as a bear sighting gone wrong, as the usual wildlife disturbances that could be easily explained away. They didn't listen. No one wanted to hear about what we had seen, what we had experienced. Eventually, I stopped trying to convince anyone. The more I spoke about it, the crazier I sounded. And Sarah left the forest, disappeared back into the city, away from the place where we had both lost our grip on reality. I think she blamed me. I know I blamed myself. The thing in the woods never went away. It's still out there, hiding in the shadows, waiting. I don't know if it's the last of its kind or if there's more like it. All I know is that we never found it, and it never stopped watching us. I lived in Tempe, Arizona for about 9 months back in 2012. I then moved to Tucson for several months after that, and lived with my great aunt, who is now in her 70s. She's a very rational, logical person, and while she's not opposed to the existence of otherworldly things, that's not usually where her mind gravitates towards when explaining things. I've asked her to tell me this story a couple of times over the years. I've since moved away and don't speak to her as much. I'll try to recount it as best I can remember. I think this occurred about 15 years ago, but I can't quite remember the year. She said she had attended a concert near Scottsdale with a friend who lived there and was driving back to Tucson, so it was fairly late. She was on I-10 and was the only vehicle on the highway. The stretch of road she was on was about halfway to Tucson. Even now, the drive is stretches of desolate area, and I can only imagine how much more there was those years ago. Suddenly, in the lane next to her, there were 3 black cars. No license plates on any of them. They came from behind her, seemingly out of nowhere. The lights were on inside of one of the cars, and then she looked and there was no one driving. But there was a man in one of the back passenger seats who seemed to be writing in a notebook. She only caught a glimpse as the three cars then sped up and got in front of her. Then she swears she saw them drive up a ramp and into the back of an 18-wheeler that had appeared on the highway up ahead. This is also remarkably strange given how well flat it is out there. It's not like you're driving around bends and coming up or down inclines. It's flat. You can see for miles and miles. She still doesn't know where that big truck came from or how she didn't see it in front of her. She recalled that the 18-wheeler then steered off the right side of the highway off into the desert. And about a minute later, the lights from the truck went out and she could no longer see it. I'm sure I'm forgetting certain details of the story. I wish I remembered more clearly or wrote to her. I wish I remembered more clearly or wrote down what she told me. Either way, I've always found this such a fascinating little tale, and the way my little old auntie tells it is so amusing that she speaks of it most nonchalantly. I asked her what she thought, and she said, likely the government or some corporation testing self-driving cars, which certainly seems plausible. At no point in time did she feel threatened or in danger. It was just an odd midnight drive in the desert. Mine was when I went scouting for hunting about 6 to 7 years ago in the middle of nowhere in Nevada. Early summer, about 30 miles north of Cave Lake. For those of you familiar with it, you'll know it's as desolate as it gets. I parked my truck and started hiking up the mountain, a 5-mile trek, thinking I was completely alone. It took me a good part of the day to find what I thought was a good spot to set up camp and start scouting. After setting up my truck, I went back to the camp. After setting up camp, I hiked another 20 minutes to the top of a canyon and spent about 3 hours glassing. I only saw a couple of deer, but was satisfied for the day, so I headed back to camp for the night. After dinner, I went to bed. I woke up in the middle of the night with an uneasy feeling. I lay there awake for a good hour before I started hearing a ton of rustling around me. Thinking it might be a mountain lion, I grabbed my handgun and flashlight, sat up and scanned around, but saw nothing. I turned my light off, now on high alert and on edge. About 5 minutes later, I heard the noises again, but this time they were hurried, like something was running away from me. I turned the light back on, scanned around again, and still saw nothing. I stayed awake for about another hour, but the noises stopped, and I never did fall back asleep, that uneasy feeling of being watched lingering. My phone alarm went off I got ready to head back out to where I had been scouting the night before to see anything at first light. As I walked out of camp, I scanned around with my light to see if I could find any tracks from the noises I heard during the night. But saw nothing. I continued to my spot, but the feeling of being watched persisted. I played it off, finished the morning scouting, and as it started to get warm, I decided to head back to camp, pack up, and go to my next spot. About 50 yards from my camp, I was looking on the ground for tracks again and saw a fresh boot print that wasn't mine. Now on high alert, I decided to just go back to the truck. As I packed up and started to hike down, I saw the same boot prints around my camp leading all the way down to the truck, following the same trail I had taken going up. About halfway down, I stopped to rest my knees, sitting at the edge of some aspens, drinking water and eating jerky. Looking back up the mountain I had just ascended, a glint of light caught my eye. I picked up my binoculars and saw a man with a rifle pointed right at me. Mind you, hunting season was still about 3 months away. I freaked out, only having my handgun. He was about 500 yards away. I waved my hand to show. USMC infantry was in a mobile unit called CAT Platoon, which meant we spent nearly every night outside the wire with our own cordons, therefore having to stand watch at night up in the turrets. I had the midnight to 4 a.m. shift every night. The Taliban knew that we didn't do much patrolling at night unless we were on a specific mission, so they would go to all of the locals who had helped us and pay them a visit. Often when I was up in the turret, I got to listen to the sounds of the Taliban torturing a guy we had talked to a day prior, just a few blocks away without being able to do anything about it. This happened on a regular basis. And then there were the sounds of locals getting freaky with their livestock, not an exaggeration. One day, your uncle would be walking down along the road just for a morning stroll when he noticed a guy farther behind him. Nothing too unusual. He kept hearing a clicking noise. It started out as click, click, click. He turned around and found that the only thing behind him was the man. I saw him. As soon as I got my pack on, he fired a shot in my direction. I started running as fast as I could down the mountain, running and running until I saw the truck. What seemed like hours later, I got in and drove straight to town as fast as I could on backcountry dirt roads. I finally got to town and went straight to the sheriff's office, telling them my story and filing a report. They told me this had happened before in the same area, and they had no idea who it was. I had never been so freaked out in my life. Now, I don't go scouting or hunting without someone with me, and I will never go back to that place. To Haunted 3 in Baghdad. My unit came in May, right after the initial push. We took over a compound that looked like an Iraqi base. Anyways, we are setting up sleeping quarters, and my unit takes over the old medical building. We can clearly see blood on the stairs, and I'm not talking sprinkles. I'm talking puddles of blood from the Until that had become before us, and clearly saw combat in that building. A few days go by, and I'm laying down on my cot at night trying to go to sleep, when suddenly I feel someone looking at me as I look up. I see a soldier that clearly wasn't American. It was an old Iraqi soldier just standing there in the middle of the room. I'm sure it wasn't just me being half asleep, because another one of my friends mentioned it a few days later. It was really creepy. I was in Afghanistan in 2010 for the push on Marja. So he shook it off, and pretty soon he starts to hear the clicking noises again, but faster. Click, click, click. He wipes around and the only thing behind him is the man just standing there. So he yells out, asking if the man heard the noise. The man shakes his head, so he shrugged it off and kept on walking. He'd been walking for a while. Then he started hearing the click noise super fast now, and it got louder and louder, click, click. He spins around to see the man right behind him, and he asked again if he heard the noise and why he was right behind him. And all the man did was smile super creepily and laugh and laugh. Then the man looked down, and so did your uncle. That's when he noticed this man did not have feet, he had hooves. My uncle turned and booked it back to his car, the whole time hearing the clicks behind him getting closer and closer. When he got to his car, he got in and had to drive past the man to go back home. The goat man just smiled at him as he drove past. Another story is shorter. Let's say this one is about your grandfather when he was young. Your grandfather was driving down the road at night and suddenly sees a man walking along the road, hitchhiking. For some reason, he felt the need to give the guy a ride. I mean, it's dark and in the middle of nowhere. So he pulls over and lets the man get in the car. Everything was normal. They were talking about where he was going and such. Then he heard a tapping, which he assumed was the guy tapping his foot. Nothing abnormal. But he kept tapping his foot and it started to get super annoying. So he asked him to stop and he apologized and stopped for a while but started up again. Then the guy asks to be dropped off down a dirt road not too far from this little town near Grandpa's house. So he said sure and took him to the dirt road, but he didn't get asked to be dropped off at any house, which confused my grandpa. So he asked if he was sure he didn't want him to drop him off closer, and he said no. So my grandpa put in park, and then the man opened the door a little, and my grandpa offered him a flashlight and turned it on facing the ground so he doesn't blind the guy. And grandpa looked down and saw he had hooves for feet. So he got out of the car and ran back to the town and refused to go back for his car alone. So the next morning they went back and there were tracks leading his car into the field. He was super creeped out. I don't remember exactly what the goat man actually did to people. My grandma just told me those two stories of the encounters and it creeped me out enough. I saw something in the road that has changed me. I want to know if anyone has experienced something similar or knows what I saw. It was December 2022 and I was Christmas shopping with a friend of mine. I live in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. It took up most of the day, so we had quite the load. It was dark by now, so we figured not much else to do, but we might as well power through wrapping everything. By the time we finished, it was a bit after 1 a.m. and we were out of cigarettes, so we left my place to a gas station. I'd done all the driving during our shopping because she doesn't handle busy traffic very well, so she offered to drive. Bit of a night out. So late night drives aren't out of the ordinary, and the road I live on is a long one. It is not isolated or in a rural area, but there are wooded areas and a train track close to my place. The neighborhood has quite a lot of apartment buildings and houses. The point is that I take a busy road daily, especially at night. So as we leave the gas station, we are coming up to the intersection with a stop sign that we need to turn left on to get to my place. I was in the passenger side playing Pokemon Go when my friend said that person must be crazy to be jogging out. I look up to see that they are approaching the intersection and someone is jogging across it. I laughed in agreement, but I was in awe and blurted out, "Wow, dude is fast and really tall. Why is he running so weird?" I didn't think much about it, but as we got closer, I realized he was running hunched and leaning forward with his arms outstretched behind, like that run they do in Naruto. His arms were long past the knee, with giant outstretched hands and long fingers. He was skinny, and I mean like sickly skinny. The closer we got, the more wrong everything looked and felt. His movements were so unusual, like twitchy, but surprisingly fluid for the speed at which he was going. There were streetlights along the intersection and roads, but it was weird because it seemed unusually dark out. As we came to the stop sign under the streetlight, he had just crossed and came to a stop right before the edge of where the light reached about 15 yards away from that. That was when I looked at the dash clock and it all hit me at once. It was the middle of winter at 1:30 a.m., cold as hell out, and someone was jogging. I realized this guy wasn't a guy. This thing was standing with its back towards us, hunched forward, with arms stretched behind, with those long outstretched claws. It was the most intimidating stance I've ever seen. It was easily over 7 feet tall, and completely black. Its head was shaped like a teardrop. At this point, we had been sitting at the stop sign staring at it for 10 seconds when it did the fastest 180 I have ever seen and was coming straight at us. I have never before had such intense fear and panic crash onto me. Pure terror. It felt so heavy and my whole being was screaming danger. "You're in danger," I yelled. "Go, go, go." The car screeched as we took off and my phone flew out of my hands. I looked behind us and sank deeper into a state of terror. This thing was not just keeping up, it was gaining on us. I yelled, "Floor it!" It's right behind us. At 60 miles per hour, we started to lose it. I scrambled for my phone to call. The car came to a stop, and I immediately turned to my friend. She was staring forward, wide-eyed. She kept saying, "I need to see it. I need to see it." I was so panicked that I instinctively turned her toward me and said, "You're not crazy, I saw it too." "You're not crazy, I saw it too. It's real. You need to go before it gets us." She snapped out of it and floated. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, then stopped. It was as if I had finally gained control over myself, almost as if the distance between us and that thing had something to do with it. My friend yelled, "What are you doing? Call the cops." My response was, "They'll never believe us." I remembered a podcast I used to listen to. The host said that when people see things, sometimes he wishes they'd turn around to verify what they saw. So I told her, "Don't pull up to my place. It could still be behind us. Fire it to the end of the road. We're going to switch as fast as we can. I'm going to drive and put my phone against the windshield to record, and you're going to use your phone to record. Then we'll have more proof for the police to back up what just happened. She panicked and said no over and over, but she gunned it and drove past my place. We got to the end of the road, switched, and I gunned it in the direction of the thing. Nothing. This all happened in minutes at the speed we were going, and that we were both moving quickly. We should have met. We started approaching where we had first seen it, and I don't know how to explain it, but I began feeling that fear again. I realized when we lost sight of it that it must have turned around and gone back in the other direction, further down the road where we first saw it. The speed limit is 25, and I slowed down to 15 as that fear started weighing on me. Then I couldn't believe what happened. It was like a movie. A big group of deer came running from the direction we were headed. They were literally running in the middle of the road and next to my car, bumping into each other. There had to be over 10 of them, buck and doe. In the middle of their run toward my car, it was far less dangerous than what they were running from. I'd never seen deer run that fast or so tightly together in such a number. I had to bring my car to a complete stop and wait for them to pass before continuing to drive. My friend commented, "It must be in that direction. Something must have terrified those deer to run towards us like that. It's gotta be that thing we saw." I was thinking the same thing and started feeling the fear again. I continued down the stretch of road. Nothing. We couldn't find it. I drove until 6, too scared to go home without proof to give to the police to look for it. I convinced myself I'd be safe if I knew the police were driving around my area looking for it. Scared that it might follow me home if it were still light out. Since that night, I could be in my living room playing a game and feel that same primal fear and panic wash over me. It wasn't every day, just a couple of times a week. It must be close, and that's why I'm feeling this state of terror. I've had it where I'm gaming, laughing with friends, and that terror crashes into me like that thing is close and is watching me. I'm not in a constant state of paranoia. That's why I feel the fear. It'll be good enjoying my night with friends or something, completely forgetting about it. Boom. The terror is starting to be more frequent and intense. As a smoker at night, I smoke and everything will feel fine. I feel safe. Other times I feel watched and unsafe, like my body is screaming, "You're in danger." The thing I saw on the road that night was black. The things I've seen since then are like white, with almost glowing white eyes and sharp exposed teeth. With the same tall, thin body and teardrop-shaped head. I know this all sounds crazy. What do you think it was? For the past couple of years I've had a large, all-white or very light gray wolf that seems to be following me. It mostly shows up around 3:07 a.m., often when I'm outside. I used to leave for work around 3:15 a.m. and it would almost always be standing in the driveway between the house and my car. Both frightens me extremely, but also doesn't seem to want to harm me. It stands almost in a defensive position, but does not growl at me. Its eyes are a yellowish amber color. I have no clue what this wolf could be or why it would be following me. It's followed me through moving to 3 different states, KY to VT to Florida. I have no reason to think it's a protector type being and no knowledge of a white wolf being culturally significant. I am mostly Irish, Scottish, and French. My grandma likes to claim we're Native American, but I did a DNA test and there was 0 Native American DNA in it. I live in Central Texas, San Antonio to be exact. This whole incident happened in the span of maybe 30-45 seconds, maybe a minute, but it felt pretty quick and surreal. I was driving on a short stretch of elevated highway, Wiersbach Parkway, if you know the city, traveling northbound between 2081, cutting over to 30. I was passing the airport just past 1000 Oaks, where the highway straightens out for a few miles until it slopes to ground level. It was raining and there are not many streetlights on this part of the highway. I was traveling 60 or 65 miles per hour. My car is a little sedan, so I had a low view of the road. I was the only one on the highway in either direction. aside from a pair of headlights several miles behind me. In the distance ahead, maybe a half mile or so, I saw what looked like a man, human outline, running or jogging on the right-hand shoulder of the road. Aside from it being nearly 1 a.m. and on an elevated stretch of road, I didn't think it too odd. There are lots of drunks in my city, and strange things have happened. Nonetheless, I moved from the right lane to the left, just in case. As I approached, I became aware that this silhouette was not getting taller as you would expect, as your perception shifts. Instead, it stayed the same height. I estimate maybe 3 or 4 feet tall, based on the fact its head came to about the same height as the hood of my car. I slowed down to about 50-55 miles per hour and stared at the back of this thing, trying to make out details through my rain-soaked windshield. As soon as I got close enough for this thing to be fully in my headlights, it dropped down to all fours as if it was trying to mimic an animal. I know this was not any animal I've seen. Its size was that of a medium-sized coyote, but it was running distinctly like a person attempting to run like an animal. Its hindquarters were raised up in the air, and I could clearly make out buttocks and its legs kicked out sideways. If you've ever seen documentaries about feral children, it'll give you an idea of the gait that I am attempting to describe. The only thing is that no human I've seen could run on all fours at the speed this thing was going. The creature was entirely naked and oily, black and smooth. The rain glistened off its skin with a shine like wet, black marble or obsidian. I could make out muscle tone and everything as this thing clipped along. As it dropped to 2 legs, it lost some speed, either intentionally or just from the change in gait. It was running about the same pace as a person could sprint. I passed this thing and it looked over its left shoulder towards me. Its face was flat, with a wide, flat nose. It had big eyes. I could see the whites and dilated dark pupils. There was no eyeshine, just those eyes against the black of its skin. Though it never looked directly in my headlight beams, so that may be inconsequential. It opened its mouth at one point as it was looking at me as it passed. Its teeth were flat and white, like a human's, but with larger and more prominent canines. It had hands and feet like a person. I couldn't make out any genitalia, but it was distinctly male in its general appearance. It had the build of a swimmer. Its body was proportionate to that of any other human, just scaled down. No crazy long limbs or anything like that. I fumbled with my phone with the intent to try and take a photo, but to be honest, I was so enamored and excited in trying to take in as much detail as possible while driving on a dark, rainy road. I also didn't think a photo would show much because of the dark rain and the glass of my car windows. But now I'm seriously thinking of getting a dash cam. I hope that the car always behind me saw this thing. It was pretty obvious. I hope I've provided enough detail for an accurate report. I have no idea what I just saw, but I'm glad I saw it. It didn't seem malicious. It looked scared, like it wasn't happy to be up there and just wanted to get off the highway. I got the very distinct impression that the only reason it dropped to all fours was in an attempt to mimic an animal and draw less attention to itself. He didn't have far to go until the exit, but there was a well-lit gas station and intersection there. Aside from a few apartment buildings and scattered industrial areas, the only other stuff along this stretch is a small amusement park and the airport. There's an old abandoned concrete plant in the area next to the highway. Again, if you're local to the area, you'd know exactly what I'm talking about. That was my first thought as to where it could have come from. It was heading away from this, though, and towards a populated area, so it doesn't make much sense. I'm still just floored that I saw this thing. I'm totally open to providing more details, but I believe this to be pretty concise. This is a story that happened to me 18 years ago. When I was 7 years old, I lived on a farm in the middle of nowhere. Both my parents worked in the mornings and the school year had just ended, so I was home alone. From a kitchen window, I saw something strange in the trees. A creature of sorts. 2 things I know. 1, this wasn't a little kid hallucination, but it was a little kid's imagination. 1, This wasn't a little kid hallucination too. I knew what it looked like. This creature was about the size of a smart car and sitting about 15 feet up in the tree, had the proportions similar to a gargoyle in both shape and posture. You know how gargoyles sit hunched over with their back legs wider and their front arms and legs close together or touching lattice the wings? No skin was shown. The creature had short bear-like fur mixed with owl-like feathers. It was massive, with the shape of a bear head and possibly a large beak. I don't have many features of the face because I was so fixated on the eyes of this beast. They were huge eyes, the size of basketballs, and the odd thing was that they were blurry, looking like a droopy oil painting. It was early summer morning, early enough to still be cool, but late enough to be clearly lit everywhere. I saw the creature at the kitchen window, ran out onto the front porch, got a better look at it. I wasn't about to go and check it out just yet, but I was about 50 yards out. So I wanted to grab my father's binoculars. When I got back to the front porch, the creature was gone, nowhere to be seen. So me, being a brave 7-year-old boy, went out to inspect the area. I saw nothing. Upon arrival, I saw nothing. No broken branches or marking or anything. The one thing I remember about the area that was different was that it was dead silent in a forest normally bursting with noise, and there was not a single thing to be heard. And I mean that forest where I used to live was super loud too, with all sorts of animals making sounds at all times of the day. Super weird. Anywho, I've never heard of any sort of cryptid that matches what I saw that day. And for 18 years I've been insanely curious. If anyone could lead me in the right direction of what sort of folklore creature and cryptid thing I saw that day, please let me know, or possibly let me know of a better subreddit to post this in. Please and thank you. I've been mulling this over in my head for a little while now, and I honestly forgot that Reddit has a community like this, since I really don't come on here too often. But I figured I'd post my experience and see if anyone had experienced similar things. So this happened last year. Well, it likes to travel a lot now that she's retired, and she'll ask me to take her to the airport. She lives about an hour outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, in a park, and she doesn't like traveling out of PHL and will instead go to EWR Newark Liberty International Airport, for those not familiar with the code or area. So last year she decided to go to South and Central America for a month and asked me to come to her house to drive her since she didn't trust my brother to actually show up when he said he would. I met her at her place the night before, went to bed for a few hours, and then we left in her car at 1 a.m. so she could get to the airport in time. We decided to take her car because it's a mid-size SUV and held her luggage better than my sedan did. We'd been on the road for about 20 minutes, or at least that's how long it seemed to me. My perception of time isn't amazing. We had to drive through many small villages, which were basically just clumps of 10 houses in a small area. The homes were super close to the road, like right on top of it, which made them seem older. There weren't any lights on, not even candle lamps in the windows. And if you're from Pennsylvania, you know what I mean about those lamps. They're everywhere. The area was surrounded by woods and had a lot of fog rolling in. It was just very creepy and foggy out. We were driving along when we suddenly came upon something. It was facing toward a telephone pole off to the right of the car, with the pole positioned just in front of a garage or a small barn structure. All I could see was the back of its head. Completely white, no hair, and its forearms, which were also totally white. It looked like it was wearing a dark shirt or something similar, but it was facing away from us, leaning into the telephone pole with its arms up against the pole and its head against its arms. The worst feeling I've ever had rose up in my chest when I saw it. My heart almost stopped, and I felt sick and terrified. All I knew was that whatever it was, I didn't want it to turn around. No matter what, I knew I couldn't be allowed to turn around or I would regret it. I've seen a lot of really weird things in my life and felt a lot of really weird sensations. I've always been super sensitive to the energy in homes and have straight up seen ghosts in my parents' home, one of which I'm very wary of. The other I'm comforted by, but that's a different story for another time. But this was actually terrifying. I cannot explain the immense feeling of dread and horror I experienced in that moment to you. You can only understand if you've experienced it yourself. We passed by it so quickly, and it was so late that I thought I must have imagined it, but a feeling stuck with me. I didn't say anything to my aunt. I thought she didn't see it either, but about 10 seconds after we went past it, she says, "Did you?" Then a long pause. "Did you see that thing?" We talked about it, and she described to me exactly what I saw, and I knew right then and there that I was going to be terrified to drive back to her home to switch cars at 4 or 5 a.m. when I got back to her place from the airport by myself. And all I could think is that I didn't want that thing to be there because I would hit it if it came into the road, and I wouldn't stop to check if I did. It wasn't going to get to me. Luckily, it wasn't there when I drove past the same area again on the way to her home. And believe me, I was hyper-aware the entire way there. I was even terrified to walk from our front door to my car. I ran and locked myself in as soon as I sat down and shut the car door. The next time I drove her to the airport, I looked for it. But it wasn't there. I haven't seen it since. I've only told a couple of friends about it, and one of them and her best friend saw something similar peeking at them around the backside of her house when they were sitting in her car one night. She also lives in rural Pennsylvania, 19 miles from me, which is a 40-minute drive. And I'm 22-ish miles outside of Philly, also roughly a 40-minute drive. She also lives out in the woods. Have any of you ever experienced something like this? I saw a video once online of something that just had a white head and white long legs walking around, but it didn't look like that. This thing was tall and had distinct arms and legs. It had no hair whatsoever on its body. I don't know if it had facial features, because it was faced towards the pole. Almost like it was counting for hide and seek with its arms up. It might have been hugging onto the pole. It wore something black, and in its presence I experienced the worst and most deeply jolting fear, which lasted only a few seconds. I've worked at a national park for 5 years, and in that time I've seen plenty of strange things. Hikers swearing they saw something watching them, campers waking up with scratches. They couldn't explain rangers finding trails that shouldn't exist. But nothing ever made me want to leave. Until now, it started with the fog. I've worked at National Park for 5 years, and in that time I've seen plenty of strange things. Hikers swearing they saw something watching them. Until now, it started with the fog. I was wrapping up my shift when it rolled in faster than any storm I'd ever seen. 1 second, the forest was bathed in the amber glow of a setting sun. Next, a wall of white swallowed the trees whole. It was too thick, too sudden. Even the air smelled wrong, like wet stone and something faintly metallic. I reached for my radio. Bass. This is Carter. We've got an unnatural fog settling in. Visibility is almost zero. Do we have any weather advisories? Static. I frowned and adjusted the dial. Base 91 read me. Well, static. Then, just as I was about to give up, a voice crackled through. Well, it was a dispatch. Ranger. The voice was choked, barely above a whisper. Tell me, please. I straightened my pulse, kicking up a notch. Who is this? A pause. Then shakily, David Langley. I felt my stomach drop. David Langley was the hiker who'd been reported missing that morning. A routine day hike turned into a search and rescue operation when he failed to check in. We had teams looking for him, but with the sun setting and now this fog, the chances of finding him were getting slimmer by the minute. David, where are you? I asked, forcing my voice to stay calm. It's in here with me, he whispered. The signal crackled, his voice distorting. Ain't Clara this time. It knows my name. A sharp chill crawled up my spine. David. What do you mean? The radio went silent. I exhaled, glancing out at the fog-shrouded trees. Every instinct told me to report back to base and wait for morning. But I couldn't ignore that call. I was a ranger. People's lives depended on me. I grabbed my flashlight and rifle, took one last look at the empty ranger station, then stepped into the fog. The moment I stepped into the fog, the world changed. The air was thick, damp, clinging to my skin like cold fingers. My flashlight barely cut through more than a few feet ahead. The trees, once familiar, now loomed as twisted silhouettes, their branches contorted like grasping hands. The usual night sounds, crickets, owls, the rustling of leaves were gone. I was alone, or at least I thought I was. I kept my rifle close and moved carefully, my boots sinking into damp earth. David, I called out in a voice swallowed by the mist. If you can hear me, keep talking. Nothing. I pressed forward, hard hammering. Every now and then I thought I saw movement. A flicker of shadow just beyond my light's reach. The sensation of being watched grew stronger. My skin prickled, instinct screaming at me to turn back. But then, a sound, not a voice, not a rustling in the trees. Something worse, a slow, wet breathing. I froze. It was close. Too close. The fog shifted, curling unnaturally as if something massive had just exhaled. My grip on the rifle tightened, and my pulse drummed in my ears. Then footsteps, heavy, deliberate. They crunched over twigs and dead leaves, circling just outside my vision. David? I tried again, my voice lower now. The footsteps stopped. Silence stretched. And then not David. The voice didn't belong to any man. It was deep, wet, layered, like multiple voices speaking at once. My stomach turned ice cold. I swung my flashlight toward the sound and for a split second saw it. Tall, thin, wrong. Its limbs were too long, its joints bent the wrong way. Its skin stretched and mottled, looked raw like something recently skinned. And its face. No eyes, no mouth, just a smooth, featureless expanse. But it knew I was looking. The thing tilted its head. I fired. The gunshot split the silence. The blast momentarily tore through the fog. I saw the thing recoil, but there was no blood, no scream, just a shuddering twitch like I'd only annoyed it. Then it took a step toward me. And another. I turned and ran. I ran blindly through the fog, branches clawing at my arms. My breath came in ragged gasps. The thing was behind me. I could hear it moving heavy steps that somehow barely disturbed the forest floor. It wasn't running, it didn't have to. I wasn't escaping. I wasn't supposed to escape. My boots skidded on wet leaves as I stumbled, barely managing to stay on my feet. I forced myself to focus. Panicking would get me killed. I needed to get back to camp, call for help, anything. Then a voice ahead. Ranger Carter. My blood turned cold. It was Jonah, or at least it sounded like Jonah. I slowed my flashlight, shaking as I swept the beam forward. A figure stood just beyond the mist, his shape flickering in and out of focus. He was wearing Jonah's uniform, standing perfectly still, his head slightly tilted. Something was wrong. Jonah, my voice was barely a whisper. Ranger Carter. The voice repeated, same tone, same inflection, like an echo that had learned to speak. My finger hovered over the trigger. Where's Grace? The figure didn't move. Where's Mark? I pressed. Silence. Then it grinned. It didn't move its mouth. It just shifted its entire face, stretching the skin, bending in a way that shouldn't have been possible. The grin was too wide, too sharp, too unnatural. I fired. The bullet tore through the figure, but there was no blood, no impact. just a ripple as if I had shot into water. And then it blinked out of existence, the fog swallowing the space it had stood in. A whisper curled around my ear. "You should not be here." I turned and bolted. The fog thickened, pressing in on me, and I realized the forest had changed. The path I had come from was gone, replaced with trees that hadn't been there before. The terrain was wrong, shifting under my feet like something was breathing beneath the soil. And then I saw them. The carvings, dozens of ancient symbols etched into the trees, their meaning unknown, their presence undeniable. The shapes seemed to pulse, as if alive. Some looked humanoid, others like impossible creatures with too many limbs, too many eyes. And at the base of the largest tree, a totem made of bone, old and yellowed and brittle, stacked in intricate patterns. Some were animal, some human. And then I heard laughter, not from behind, but from above. I lifted my flashlight and my heart nearly stopped. The shape was clinging to the highest branches, long limbs wrapped around the trunk, its body bent at unnatural angles. It had no face, only smooth, stretched skin where eyes and a mouth should have been. It knew I was looking. It started to climb down. I ran. Didn't think I'd just move, tearing through the undergrowth, my body screaming at me to get out. The thing above me was fast. I could hear it moving through the branches and possibly keeping pace. It wanted me to run. It was playing with me. I forced my legs to move faster, dodging between trees, barely able to see through the fog. The air felt heavier, thicker, as if the forest itself was trying to hold me in place. The symbols on the trees flickered as I passed, like they were reacting to my presence. And then I hit something, not a tree, something soft. I staggered back, my flashlight tilting upward. A body strung up between two trees, arms stretched wide, its head tilted forward. Skin pale, clothes tattered. Jonah's stomach lurched. His ranger uniform was soaked in something dark. His chest rose and fell in shallow, ragged breaths. He was alive. Jonah, I grabbed his arm. His skin was ice cold. What the hell happened? Who did this? His eyes fluttered open, unfocused. Wrong. Then his lips parted, just slightly. And in a voice that wasn't his, he whispered, "It's coming." A crack sounded above me. I dived forward, just as something heavy slammed into the ground where I had been standing. Dirt exploded outward, my ears ringing. I turned, heart hammering. The thing had dropped from the trees. It was standing, tall, too tall. Its limbs were long and thin, its skin stretched tight over its frame. Its face, or what should have been a face, was featureless save for deep vertical slits where its mouth should be. It stood perfectly still, its head tilting slightly as if studying me. I couldn't breathe. Then it moved, not stepped, glided. It was suddenly closer, its arms twitching at its sides. The slits on its face quivered. I didn't wait for it to get closer. I raised my gun and fired point blank. Through the trees, the creature jerked. For the briefest second, I thought it worked. That the bullet had done something. Then its body shuddered. Like reality itself was trying to correct something that shouldn't exist. The bullet went closed. It took another step. I did the only thing I could. I ran. Jonah's whisper echoed behind me, mixing with the thing's heavy, dragging footsteps. "He should not be here." My breath came in ragged gasps. The thing behind me wasn't running. It didn't have to. It knew I couldn't escape. It was hurting me. I could hear it just out of sight, a shifting presence moving through the fog, always there. The slits where its mouth should be had quivered before it moved, like it had been tasting the air. I had one bullet left, but I already knew it wouldn't matter. The fog thickened around me and the forest changed. It became twisted, their bark blackened and curling like burned paper. I saw the same strange symbols carved into them. glowing faintly. They weren't random. They were marking something. And then the trees opened up and I stumbled into a clearing. A circle of stones stood in the center, arranged in a way that made my stomach twist. Ancient wrong. The fog curled unnaturally around them like it was alive. Something was buried here. Just in time to see Jonah step out from the trees, except it wasn't him. His head was still tilted forward, his movement slow and deliberate like a puppet on loose strings. The wound on his chest was gone, his eyes black. The thing behind me hadn't followed me into the clearing, but Jonah had. His mouth opened too wide, stretching at the corners. And in that same, his voice, he whispered, "You need to finish it." I took a step back. Finish what? Jonah's black eyes flicked to the stones, and my gut clenched. The thing wasn't chasing me. It was forcing me here, because something else was waiting, and I just walked straight into it. I couldn't breathe. Jonah, if it was Jonah, moved closer. He stopped stiff and mechanical. His head tilted even further back until it was almost at an unnatural angle. The skin on his face stretched and the slits in his mouth seemed to widen. Finish it. I felt the weight of those words crush me like the fog had become something more than just air. The stars were just ahead, their edges sharpened the dim light. The mist curled around them, thickening as if they were drawing something in. I looked back at the trees. The creature hadn't followed me into the clearing, but it was still there, somewhere hidden in the mist. Watching, waiting. It knew what I had to do. The air was heavy, but wide. My heart pounded in my chest, but I didn't dare make a sound. The stone circle felt like a trap when I had walked into it without realizing it. Jonah knew whatever it was, reached for me, fingers long and twisted like claws. I couldn't move. Then I heard something, a clink, a whisper, soft and delicate like a distant song. I turned, and standing across from me, obscured by the fog, was the totem. The one my mark had spoken of. The one that hadn't been there before. Carved into the stone were the same symbols as on the trees. Ancient, unfathomable. And surrounding the totem were shapes. Shadows flickering, fading in and out like they couldn't hold their form. The thing in the fog, the one that had been pulling at us, twisting our realities. I finally understood. The totem wasn't just a monument, it was a gate. It was holding the creature in this world. Jonah's twisted form reached out again. You need to stop it. Break it! I took a step forward, then another, my breath catching. The fog seemed to shrink back, like the thing was scared of me moving closer to the totem. I had no choice now. With trembling hands, I raised my rifle and aimed at the totem. The creature, the thing in the fog, was growing desperate. Its movements became erratic, its slits in its face twitching, expanding. The thing wanted to stop me, but it couldn't. I pulled the trigger. The bullet hit the totem with a sharp crack. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the ground beneath me shuddered. The sky overhead seemed to ripple. The fog screamed. Everything twisted. The totem began to crack. The fog howled as its form changed, stretching in agony. The black shapes around us wavered, revealing the skeletal remains that we had walked here before. Their bones crumbled away like dust lost to time. I stumbled back, shielding my face from the rush of air. The totem collapsed. The creature screamed, and then it was gone. The fog lifted slowly at first, then all at once, in the clearing. It was silent. The trees were still. I stood alone. Even if she knows your name, so no one believes me. I try to warn them, but no one believes me. I'm a park ranger. Illegally, I can give away too much information by. I work close to the Adirondacks. I don't know if this happens all over the country or not. Hell, maybe all over the world. But I'm giving you all this life-saving advice, just in case this isn't a local phenomenon. My name is Peter, but Not really, but for the sake of this story, it is. I'm not giving out my real information because when I started this job, they made me sign an NDA. I sold as a park ranger 6 months ago. They showed me the ropes pretty fast, and due to COVID, a lot of people went camping this year as a way to hang out with friends. As people tend to do, they would drink and get themselves hurt or lost, so we went on a lot of search and rescue missions. If I'm being honest, more searches than rescues. I still remember the first day I learned about these women. We got called to find a couple in their 20s who wandered away from their group for a few hours, so we had to go find them. I went out with my supervisor, Jane, who is the toughest person I know and can easily kick my ass. So anyway, it was around 4 p.m. We're deep in the woods, closest to their campsite. The couple probably went off for a quickie and got lost. People do that all the time here. After a while, out of my peripheral, I see a figure whom I assumed was the woman we were looking for. I saw dark brown hair and blue from her clothes. "Help me, please." I could hear her say weakly. I assumed it was her. It sounded close to my ear, but B was yards away from me. As I went to turn to face the girl, Jane grabbed my head and turned it back forward. "You don't want to do that," she says. She continues to push me forward. "But there's a girl," I said as I tried to turn my head again. She turned it back forward, with more force this time. "Hello there, newbie. Keep walking forward," she says. "What's your name?" Jane calls into the forest. Her harsh voice echoes in the trees. The girl doesn't answer the question. "Help me, please. I really need help." The girl pleads. Jane and I continue walking forward. "Tell me your name and I'll help you," Jane commands. "Please. I just need your help so bad. Come on, Peter, please," the girl begs. I stop in my tracks and look at Jane. She says my name. She might know me. "We have to go help her," I protest. "If you want to go, you're going alone. And you won't come back," she says with anger in her voice. I listen to my command, and I'll be honest, at the time I felt guilty. But now I'm glad I did. So we find the missing couple. We return them safely to camp. And Jane and I go back to the station. Want to tell me what that was about? I ask Jane angrily. "It's a long story," she says dismissively. I press the topic. "I've got time. Tell me." I challenged her. She sighed and made me promise not to tell civilians, but I don't feel right keeping it to myself. Honestly, I don't know what they are. They don't know either. And he worked here 50 years. On that one, he told me about a girl who needs help. Don't look at her until she tells you her name. Why? They don't have names. They don't know how to make one up. Or maybe they don't know what the question means. Maybe they even think they are so powerful they don't need one. But they'll do anything to get you to look, ask for help, or ask for sex. Say they know you, your mom, details of your family. Anything to get you to look. She somberly spun the tale about what happens if you look. I asked her, I had the same question. My superior, Felix, didn't know either. He does now, but isn't really around to tell. All he knows is that if they're able to get you to look, you walk off and don't come back. She said, "What happened to Felix?" I asked. When I said his name, a flicker of pain crossed her face. It was the only time I saw her express anything other than anger until this point. He looked. We were looking for someone's stupid lost dog. He was in front of me, and from behind us we heard a woman whisper Felix. When that didn't work, the voice changed to a child's voice, and we heard a panicked little girl call out Gump. It was imitating his granddaughter, who had drowned in the swimming pool 4 months earlier. I couldn't stop him. He turns and whispers Aubrey. I knew the exact moment he laid his eyes on it. His pupils got huge, like he was rolling, and his eyes glazed over. It was like he was on autopilot as he started walking forward. I screamed for him to stop, but I didn't move, I didn't turn around. I kept walking forward like a coward. We never found his body. We never will either. I don't know what it does, but if you see it, you're never seen again. All we found was his dog tag from the army and his wedding ring hanging on a branch at the top of a tree branch. She finished her tale and walked to the cooler, grabbed herself a bottle of Jameson and drank it straight. So why doesn't everyone know about this? I asked her as she shrugged. Better than us, she callously remarked. What the hell do you mean? I asked her in anger. Look, it needs people, for whatever reason. If it doesn't find people out there, what's going to happen? We'll come here then to the suburbs. They'll be everywhere. Sure, it sucks. Some civilians will die, but it's better hands seeing what happens when they lose their supply. When she told me this, I was angry, but I couldn't argue. The second time I saw it was even scarier. A young man fell into a ditch and couldn't get out, so we had to go help him. As I walked to the location, I saw one in my peripheral, but it was in the direction we needed to go. What the hell do we do? I asked Jane in a panic. I didn't want to get near that thing. We walk. It's okay to get close. Just don't look. She warns me. We walk. Can you help me? It asks in a childish voice. I look at the ground to not be tempted to peek. Come on, guys. Really? I'm hungry. Help me. It begs. It's only 20 feet away now. I keep walking close. Peter, come on, help. Jane, someone help me. It won't. As I pass it, I feel cold. Like I just opened up my freezer. It has a smell to it, like dirty pond water, and it felt bad. Like a ball of anxiety you feel when your plane takes off. Or the rush you get when you go down the hill of a roller coaster. My subconscious knew this thing should not be. My body gets covered goosebumps as I watch my feet crunch. The fall leaves, but the goosebumps are not from the cold. We pass it, and it cried. Come on, where are you going? I want to go home. It pleads. Eventually it stops, asking us to help it. Maybe it got too far away and we couldn't hear it. Maybe it gave up because we knew it won't crack. I don't know. I don't really understand this thing, or maybe things, much at all. I have many more stories of these things, but this is story time. Maybe I'll post some other times if they don't bust my ass for posting this. I'm at a public library, hoping they can trace this back to me. Jane won't snitch. I trust her. In the 6 months I've worked here, 100 people went missing without a trace. When the cops pay us off to say it was an accident or animal or drowning, and that's only the area I survey. I can't imagine how many statewide, countrywide, worldwide at least. If an animal eats you, it'll leave bones as evidence. This thing got 100. I can stand by and let this keep happening. I won't be complicit in people going missing like this. So please, especially around the Adirondacks, if a girl in the woods is alone and needs help or wants to talk to you, don't look until it gives you a name. I don't know what happens when it gets you. I never want to find out, and I never want you to find out either. Stay safe, take care of each other. Please. My name is Mark. My wife and I just got divorced. It got really ugly, and she ended up getting almost everything. After all was said and done for a while, thankfully a buddy of mine owned a cabin upstate that he never used, and he was kind enough to give me the keys to stay there for a while. The drive to the cabin was peaceful. Long stretches of forest with rural towns dotting the road, and the view from the cabin was spectacular. It sat atop a hill overlooking a valley of pine forests cut in half by a wide river. The cabin was a decent-sized 2-bedroom log house. The decorations and furniture really gave off that rustic feel you'd expect from an isolated cabin. The drive from the city took around 6 hours, and the sun had just begun to set when I arrived. I was exhausted, so off to bed I went. planning on enjoying the beauty of the sun rising over the hills in the morning. I lay in bed and quickly drifted off. The change of scenery alone had helped me relax more than I had in weeks. Knock, knock, knock. I started to wake to pounding on the front door of the cabin. I checked the time and it was 11 p.m. The nearest town was a good 10-mile drive away and there wasn't another house in sight for miles. Who the hell would be out here this late? I thought to myself. I slowly crept over to the window to look out at whoever was on the porch knocking. I could feel my heart racing. I heard it pounding in my ears. I cracked the blinds open just enough to see that there was a park ranger standing at the door. Slightly relieved, I shouted through the window, trying to help you. "Yeah, I noticed your car." "You didn't sign in." "Back in town," the ranger replied. I didn't know I had to. "This is my friend's cabin," I responded. I was beyond confused. How did he just happen to notice my car? You could see the house from the main road, thanks to all the pines. And if my friend owns this place, why would a park ranger be up here asking me to sign in? This is in federal land. And how do I know? I told myself. The ranger's footsteps across the wooden floor cut through the stillness of the night. He leaned down to peer in the window, taking out his flashlight and flicking it on as he approached. I backed off from the window and just being paranoid, I told myself. All the stress from the divorce must be messing with me. He's just making sure I'm safe. I tried reassuring myself, but part of me wouldn't let go of the feeling that something wasn't right. "You come outside and I'll take down your information." The ranger said, shining his flashlight in the window to no avail, as the blinds completely obscured his view. "How about I come to town tomorrow? I had a long drive and really just want to get back to bed," I replied. Maybe he's a ranger, maybe he's a serial killer, and I'm not taking any chances, even if I am just being paranoid. "We're gonna need your information tonight, just in case something were to happen to you," he said before letting out a soft chuckle. A lot of people go missing around these parts. That's why everyone has to check in. "I understand, sir, but I really would rather do it in the morning," I replied. "Well, I can't force you. They'll tell them to be expecting you down at the station then." He sounded annoyed, but I heard his footsteps grow faint before hearing a car door shut. The engine fired up but then quickly faded away. I walked back to the window to be sure that he was gone. I looked out the window and saw the silhouette of a person standing just outside the reach of the porch light. I stumbled backward. I knew he wasn't a ranger, I thought, holding back a scream, not wanting to alert him. I looked back out the window and he was standing at the window trying to look in. I startled again and fell backward to the floor. He started knocking on the window. Now my heart was really racing. It was all I could hear. My hands became sweaty from perspiration covering my entire body. There was a long silence that fell over the cabin. After a few minutes, against my better judgment, I crept back to the window. I peered outside and the sucker was still standing there, but he wasn't wearing a park ranger uniform. Instead, he wore jeans and a jacket. That's when I noticed he didn't have a face, just smooth skin where his eyes and mouth should be. I didn't even know what to think at this point. His hand slid up the sides of his head and suddenly turned its blank face to look directly at where I was standing behind the blinds. He grasped the back of his head and a horrible tearing sound rang out as it quickly ripped its face off. Underneath was a massive ball of worm. They began falling to the floor. The body stood there for a moment, then started pounding against the glass. I ran to the bathroom, slammed the door shut, and locked it. Tears started running down my face when I heard the window smash. I heard the glass crunch underneath its feet, followed by the sounds of footsteps walking throughout the house. Suddenly, the house fell silent, and a soft tapping on the bathroom door. I heard a distorted voice say, "Why don't you come outside, and I'll take down your information." I sat bolt upright in the bathtub, holding back my cries and screams. hoping this was all just a nightmare. Then I heard it again. "Why don't you come outside and I'll take down your information?" There was a long pause where a loud pounding sound rang out and the door flew off its hinges. I screamed as a bright light hit my face. It was sunlight, and these were sheriffs. One of the officers looked at me and backed out of the room, gagging. I looked down and the tub was full of worms and my body was covered in bruises and cuts and divots in my skin from where the worms had started eating my flesh. I jumped out of the tub as fast as I could, falling onto the floor sobbing. The sheriff helped me up, wrapped a towel around me and rushed me out of the house. They took me to hospital, and after the doctors examined me, I asked the deputy accompanying me what happened. "Your friend called us, said he hadn't heard from you in a few days, so we went to do a wellness check on you. Well, when we got there, we saw the busted window and knew something was up. So we busted in. And the worm, I asked him, don't know. Best guess is it's some ritual. Whoever has been doing, you're lucky. Every victim we have found has been dead, nothing but bones, even after being gone only a week. I don't know whether to tell him what happened or not. I wasn't even sure if what I saw was real. No way he believed me. Maybe I was really kidnapped. Maybe I was drugged. I don't know. Well, I just get back up there. Small force. We get all hands on deck and I got dinner waiting back home. He said as a worm fell out of his mouth on the bright white hospital floor. My eyes widened as he started laughing. You take care now. Don't worry. Well, call if we need you. A lot of people go missing around these parts. I won't forget you, Mark. I was released from the hospital and went home not long after he left. After a few weeks, the wounds had mostly healed. The deeper ones will probably leave scars. I called the sheriff's department where it happened yesterday, and they told me they didn't have any leads on my case. I'm not just forgetting that the whole thing happened, but I keep having nightmares about being eaten by worms. Maybe sharing my story here will help get rid of the nightmares. I lived in Tempe, Arizona for about 9 months back in 2012. I then moved to Tucson for several months after that and lived with my great aunt, a professional logician, and while she's not opposed to the existence of otherworldly things, that's not usually where her mind gravitates towards when explaining things. I've asked her to tell me this story a couple of times over the years. I've since moved away and don't speak to her as much, but I'll try to recount it as best I can remember. I think this occurred about 15 years ago, but I can't quite remember the year. She said she had attended a concert near Scottsdale with a friend who lived there in Tucson, so it was fairly late. She was on I-10 and was the only vehicle on the highway. The stretch of road she was on was about halfway to Tucson. Even now, that drive has stretches of desolate area, and I can only imagine how much more there was those years ago. Suddenly, in the lane next to her, there were 3 black cars. No license plates on any of them. They came from behind her, seemingly out of nowhere. The lights were on inside of one of the cars, and when she looked in, there was no one driving, but there was a man in one of the back passenger seats who seemed to be writing in a notebook. She only caught a glimpse as the 3 cars then sped up and got in front of her, and she swears she saw them drive up a ramp and into the back of an 18-wheeler that had appeared on the highway up ahead. This is also remarkably strange, given how well flat it is out there. It's not like you're driving around bends and coming up or down in climbs. It's flat. You can see for miles and miles. She still doesn't know where that big truck came from or how she didn't see it in front of her. She recalled that the 18-wheeler then steered off the right side of the highway off into the desert, and about a minute later the lights from the truck went out and she could no longer see it. I'm sure I'm forgetting certain details of the story. I wish I remembered more clearly or wrote down what she told me. Either way, I've always found this such a fascinating little tale, and then the way my little old auntie tells it is so amusing that she speaks of it excellently. I asked her what she thought, and she said that likely the government or some corporation was testing self-driving cars, which certainly seems plausible. At no point in time did she feel threatened or in danger. It was just an odd midnight drive in the desert. Mine was when I went scouting for hunting about 6 or 7 years ago in the middle of early summer, about 30 miles north of Cave Lake. For those familiar with it, you'll know it's as desolate as it gets. I parked my truck and started hiking up the mountain, a 5-mile trek, thinking I was completely alone. It took me a good part of the day to find what I thought was a good spot to set up camp and start scouting. After setting up camp, I hiked another 20 minutes on the top of a canyon and spent about 3 hours glassing. I only saw a couple of deer, but was satisfied for the day, so I headed back to camp for the night. After dinner, I went to bed. I woke up in the middle of the night with an uneasy feeling. I lay there awake for a good hour before I started hearing a ton of rustling around me. Thinking it might be a mountain lion, I grabbed my handgun and flashlight, sat up and scanned around, but saw nothing. I turned off my light, now on high alert and on edge. About 5 minutes later, I heard the noises again, but this time they were hurried, as something was running away from me. I turned my light back on, scanned around again, and still saw nothing. I stayed awake for about another hour, but the noises stopped and I never did fall back asleep. That uneasy feeling of being watched lingered. My phone alarm went off at 4:30 a.m. I got ready to head back out to where I had been scouting the night before to see if anything was different at first light. As I walked out of camp, I scanned around with my light to see if I could find any tracks from the noises I heard during the night, but saw nothing. I continued to my spot, but the feeling of being watched persisted. I played it off, finished the morning scouting, and as it started to get warm, I decided to head back to camp, pack up, and go to my next spot. About 50 yards from my camp, I was looking on the ground for tracks again and saw fresh boot prints that weren't mine. On high alert, I decided to just go back to the truck. As I packed up and started to hike down, I saw the same boot prints around my camp, leading all the way down to the truck, following the same trail I had taken going up. About halfway down, I stopped to rest my knees, sitting at the edge of some aspens, drinking water and eating jerky. Looking back up the mountain I had just descended, a glint of light caught my eye. I picked up my binoculars and saw a man with a rifle pointed right at me. Mind you, hunting season was still about 3 months away. I freaked out, only having my handgun. He was a good 500 yards away. I waved my hand to show I saw him. As soon as I got my pack on, he fired a shot in my direction. USMC Infantry was in a mobile unit called CAT Platoon, which means we spent nearly every night outside the wire with our own cordons and therefore had to stand watch at night up in the turrets. I had the midnight 4 a.m. shift every night. The Taliban knew that we didn't really do a lot of patrolling at night unless we were on a specific mission. So that was when they would go to all of the locals who had helped us and pay them a visit. So me up in the turret often got to listen to the sounds of the Taliban torturing a guy we had talked to a day prior a few blocks away without the ability to do anything about it. Happened on a regular basis. And the sounds of locals getting freaky with their livestock, not an exaggeration. A lot of Native American history was told orally and were told for a purpose, as a warning at times or even just to scare the kids from wandering off. I'm not sure which are which. In all honesty, I just remember her telling me stories on long car rides or on spooky nights. The goat man was a wanderer. She told the stories as if it happened to someone in the family. She always swore it was true. So just make a general so you can imagine this happened to your own family members. One day, your uncle walking down along the road just for a morning and he noticed a guy farther behind him. Nothing too unusual. He kept hearing clicking noise. It started out as click, click, click. He turned around and the only thing behind him was the man. So he shook it off. I started running as fast as I could down the mountain, running and running until I saw the truck. What seemed like hours later, I got in and drove straight to town as fast as I could on backcountry dirt roads. I finally got to town and went straight to the sheriff's office, telling them my story and filing a report. They told me this had happened before in the same area, and they had no idea who it was. I had never been so freaked out in my life. Now, I don't go scouting or hunting without someone with me, and I will never go back to that place. 2003 in Baghdad. My unit came in May, right after the initial push. We took over a compound that looked like an Iraqi base. Anyways, we were setting up sleeping quarters and my unit takes over the old medical building. We can clearly see blood on the stairs, and I'm not talking sprinkles. I'm talking puddles of blood from the intel that had become before us and clearly saw combat in that building. A few days go by and I'm laying down on my cot at night trying to go to sleep, when suddenly I feel someone looking at me as I look up. I see a soldier that clearly wasn't American. It was an old Iraqi soldier just standing there in the middle of the room. I'm sure it wasn't just me being half asleep because another one of my friends mentioned it a few days later. It was really creepy. It was in Afghanistan in 2010 for the push on Marja. Then pretty soon he starts to hear the clicking noises again, but faster. Click, click, click. He whips around and sees that the only thing behind him is the man just standing there. So he yells out asking if the man heard the noise. The man shakes his head. So he shrugs it off and keeps on walking. I've been walking for a while and he starts hearing the click noise super fast now and it gets louder and louder. Click, click. He spins around to see the man right behind him and asks again if he heard the noise and why he's right behind him. And all the man does is smile super creepily and laugh and laugh. Then the man looks down and so does your uncle. That's when he notices that this man doesn't have feet. He has hooves. My uncle turns and books it back to his car, the whole time hearing the clicks behind him getting closer and closer. When he gets to his car, he gets in and has to drive past the man to go back home. The goat man just smiles at him as he drives past. Another story, a shorter one, let's say. This one is about your grandfather when he was young. Your grandfather was driving down the road at night and suddenly sees a man walking along the road hitchhiking. For some reason, he feels the need to give the guy a ride. I mean, it's dark and in the middle of nowhere. So he pulls over and lets the man get in the car. Everything is normal. They're talking about where he's going and such. Then he hears a tapping, which he assumes is the guy tapping his foot. Nothing abnormal, but he kept tapping his foot and it started to get super annoying. So he asked him to stop and he apologized and stopped for a while, but started up again. Then the guy asks to be dropped off down a dirt road not too far from this little town near Grandpa's house. So he said sure and took him to the dirt road. But he didn't get asked to be dropped off at any house, which confused my grandpa. So he asked if he was sure he didn't want him to drop him off closer, and he said no. So my grandpa put in park, and that the man opened the door a little, and my grandpa offered him a flashlight and turned it on, facing the ground so he doesn't blind the guy, and grandpa looked down and saw he had hooves for feet. So he got out of the car and ran back to the town and refused to go back for his car alone. So the next morning they went back and there we tracks, leaving his car into the field. He was super creeped out. I don't remember exactly what the goat man actually did to people. My grandma just told me those two stories of the encounters and it creeped me out enough. I saw something in the road that has changed me. I want to know if anyone has experienced something similar or knows what I saw. It was December 2022 and I was Christmas shopping with a friend of mine. I live in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. It took up most of the day, so we had quite the load. It was dark by now, so we figured not much else to do, but we might as well power through wrapping everything. By the time we finished, it was a bit after 1 a.m. and we were out of cigarettes, so we left my place to a gas station. I had done all the driving during our shopping because she doesn't handle busy traffic very well, so she offered to drive a bit of a night owl, so late night drives aren't out of the ordinary, and the road I live on is a long one. It is not isolated or in a rural area, but there are wooded areas and a train track close to my place. The neighborhood is quite a lot of apartment buildings and houses. The point is that I take a busy road daily, especially at night. So as we leave the gas station, we are coming up to the intersection with a stop sign that we need to turn left on to get to my place. I was in the passenger side playing Pokemon Go when my friend said that person must be crazy to be jogging out. I look up to see that they are approaching the intersection and someone is jogging across it. I laughed in agreement, but I was in awe and blurted out, "Wow, dude is fast and really tall. Why is he running so weird?" I didn't think much about it, but as we got closer, I realized he was running hunched and leaning forward with his arms outstretched behind, like that run they do in Naruto. His arms were long past the knee, with giant outstretched hands and long fingers. He was skinny, and I mean like sickly skinny. The closer we got, the more wrong everything looked and felt. His movements were so weird, like twitchy, but so fluid for the speed at which he was going. There were streetlights all along the intersection and roads, but it was so weird because it seemed unusually dark out as we came to the stop sign. Under the streetlight, he had just crossed and stopped right before the edge of where the light reached, about 15 yards out, if that. That was when I looked at the dash clock and it all hit me at once. It was the middle of winter at 1:30 a.m., cold as hell out, and someone was jogging. I realized this guy wasn't a guy. This thing was standing with its back toward us, hunched forward, with arms stretched behind, with those long outstretched claws. It was the most intimidating stance I've ever seen. It was easily over 7 feet tall and completely black. Its head was shaped like a teardrop. At this point, we had been sitting at the stop sign staring at it for 10 seconds when it did the fastest eddytania I've ever seen and was coming straight at us. I'd never before had intense fear and panic crash onto me, pure terror. It felt so heavy and my whole being was screaming, "Danger, you're in danger." I yelled, "Go, go, go." The car screeched as we took off and my phone flew out of my hand. I looked behind us and sank deeper into a state of terror. This thing was not just keeping up, it was gaining on us. I yelled, "Florence!" It was right behind us at 60 miles per hour. We started to lose it. I scrambled for my phone to call 9. The car came to a stop and I immediately turned to my friend. She was staring forward wide-eyed. She kept saying, "I need to see it, I need to see it." I was so panicked that I instinctively turned her towards me and said, "You're not crazy, I saw it too." "You're not crazy, I saw it too." "I saw it too. It's real. We need to go before it gets us out of it," Florida. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. Then stopped. It was like I finally got a grip back on myself, almost as if it were the result of the distance between us and that thing. My friend yelled, "What are you doing?" "Call the cops." My response was, "They'll never believe us." I used to listen to a podcast and I remembered the host's words about how when people see things, sometimes he wishes they'd turn around to verify what they saw. So I told her, "Don't pull up to my place. It could still be behind us. Floor it to the end of the road. We're going to switch as fast as we can. I'm going to drive and put my phone against the windshield to record, and you're going to use your phone to record. Then you can have more proof for the police to back up what just happened." She panicked and said no over and over, but she gunned it and drove past my place. We got to the end of the road, switched, and I gunned it toward the direction of the thing. Nothing. This all happened in minutes at the speed we were going, and though we should have met, we started to approach where we had first seen it, and I don't know how to explain it, but I started to feel that fear again. I realized when we lost sight of it that it must have turned around and gone back in the other direction, further down the road where we first saw it. The speed limit is 25, and I slowed down to 15 when that fear started weighing on me. Then I couldn't believe what happened. It was like a movie. A big group of deer came running from the direction we were headed. They were literally running in the middle of the road and next to the car, bumping into each other. There had to be over 10 of them, buck and doe, in the middle of the run toward the car. It was far less dangerous than what they were running from. I had never seen deer run that fast or so tightly together in such a large number. I had to come to a complete stop and wait for them to get by before I continued driving. My friend commented, "It must be in that direction. Something must have terrified those deer to run towards us like that. It's gotta be that thing we saw." I was thinking the same thing and started to feel the fear again. I continued down the stretch of road. Nothing. We couldn't find it. I drove until 6 o'clock, too scared to go home without proof to give to the police to look for it. I convinced myself I'd be safe if I knew the police were driving around my area looking for it, scared that it might follow me home if it was still light out. Since that night, I can be in my living room playing a game and feel that same primal fear and panic wash over me. Not every day, just a couple of times a week. It must be close, and that's why I'm feeling this state of terror. I've hit it where I'm gaming, laughing with friends, and then that terror crashes into me like that thing is close and is watching me. I know I'm not in a constant state of paranoia, so that's why I feel the fear. It would be good enjoying my night with friends or something, completely with the thing out of my mind. And then boom, the terror starts to be more frequent and intense. As a smoker, at night I smoke, and everything will feel fine. I feel safe. Other times I feel watched and unsafe, like my body is screaming, "You're in danger." The thing I saw on the road that night was black. The things I've seen after are like white, with almost glowing white eyes and sharp exposed teeth, but the same tall, thin body and teardrop-shaped head. I know this all sounds crazy. What do you think it was? For the past couple of years, I've had a large all-white or very light gray wolf that seems to be following me. It mostly shows up around 3 a.m., often when I'm outside. I used to leave for work around 3:15 a.m., and it would almost always be standing in the driveway between the house and my car. It both frightens me extremely, but also doesn't seem to want to harm me. It stands almost in a defensive position, but does not growl at me. Its eyes are a yellowish amber color. I have no clue what this wolf could be or why it would be following me. It's followed me through moving to 3 different states, Kentucky to Vermont to Florida. I have no reason to think it's a protector-type being and no knowledge of a white wolf being culturally significant. I am mostly Irish, Scottish, and French. My grandma likes to claim we're Native American, but I did a DNA test and there was 0 Native American DNA in it. I live in Central Texas, San Antonio to be exact. This whole incident happened in the span of maybe 30-45 seconds, maybe a minute, but it felt pretty quick and surreal. I was driving on a short stretch of elevated highway Resbach Parkway, if you know the city, traveling northbound between 281, cutting over to 35. I was passing the airport just past Thousand Oaks, where the highway straightens out for a few miles until it slopes to ground level. It was raining, and there are not many streetlights on this part of the highway. I was traveling 60 or 65 miles per hour. My car is a little sedan, so I had a low view of the road. I was the only one on the highway in either direction aside from a pair of headlights several miles behind me. In the distance ahead, maybe a half mile or so, I saw what looked like a man, human outline, running or jogging on the right-hand shoulder of the road. Aside from it being nearly 190 and on an elevated stretch of road, I didn't think it too odd. There are lots of drunks in my city and strange things have happened. Nonetheless, I moved from the right lane to the left just in case. As I approached, I became aware that this silhouette was not getting taller as you would expect, as your perception shifts. Instead, it stayed the same height, maybe 3 or 4 feet tall, based on the fact its head came to about the same height as my car's hood. I slowed down to about 50-55 miles per hour and stared at the back of this thing through my rain-soaked windshield, trying to make out details. As soon as I got close enough for this thing to be fully in my headlights, I moved down to all fours, as if it was trying to mimic an animal. I know this wasn't any animal I've seen. Its size was that of a medium-sized coyote, but it was running distinctly like a person attempting to run like an animal. Its hindquarters raised up in the air and its legs kicking out sideways. If you've ever seen documentaries about feral children, they give you an idea of the gait I'm attempting to describe. The only thing is that no human I've seen could run on all fours at this thing's speed. The creature was entirely naked and oily, black and smooth. The rain glistened off its skin with a shine like wet black marble or obsidian. I could make out muscle tone and everything. As this thing clopped along, as it dropped to 2 legs, it lost some speed, either intentionally or just from the change in gait. It was running about the same pace as a person could sprint. I passed this thing and it looked over its left shoulder. Its face was flat, with a flat, wide nose. It had big eyes. I could see the whites and dilated dark pupils. There was no eye shine, which I think is unusual, just those eyes against the black of its skin, though it never looked directly in my headlight beams, so that may be inconsequential. It opened its mouth at one point as it was looking at me as it passed. Its teeth were flat and white, like a human's, but with larger and more prominent canine. It had hands and feet like a person. I couldn't make out any genitalia, but it was distinctly male in its general appearance. It had what would best be described as a swimmer's build. Its body was proportionate to that of any other human, that just scaled down, no crazy long limbs or anything like that. I did fumble with my phone with the intent to try and take a photo, but to be honest, I was so enamored and excited and trying to take in as much detail as possible while driving on a dark, rainy road. I also didn't think a photo would show much because of the dark rain and the glass of my car windows, but now I'm seriously thinking of getting a dash cam. I hope that the car always behind me saw this thing. It was pretty obvious. I hope I've provided enough detail for an accurate report. I have no idea what I just saw, but I'm glad I saw it. It didn't seem malicious. It looked scared, like it was not happy to be up there and just wanted to get off the highway. I got the very distinct impression that the only reason it dropped to all fours was in an attempt to mimic an animal and draw less attention to itself. He didn't have far to go till the exit, but there was a well-lit gas station and intersection there. Aside from a few apartment buildings and scattered industrial areas, the only other stuff along this stretch is a small amusement park and the airport. There's an old abandoned concrete plant in the area next to the highway. Again, if you're local to the area, you'd know exactly what I'm talking about. That was my first thought as to where it could have come from. It was heading away from this though, and towards a populated area, so it doesn't make much sense. I'm still just floored that I saw this thing. I'm totally open to providing more details, but I believe this to be pretty concise. This is a story that happened to me 18 years ago. When I was 7 years old, I lived on a farmhouse in the middle of nowhere. Both my parents worked in the mornings and the school year had just ended, so I was home alone. From the kitchen window, I saw something strange in the trees. A creature of sorts. 2 things I know. 1, this wasn't a little kid's hallucination. 2, I know what it looked like. This creature was about the size of a smart car and sitting about 15 feet up in the tree and had the proportions similar to a gargoyle in both shape and posture. You know how gargoyles sit hunched over with their back legs wider and their front arms and legs close together or touching minus the wings? Their skin was shown. The creature had short bear-like fur mixed with owl-like feathers. The head was massive, with the shape of a bear's head and possibly a large beak. I don't know many features of the face because I was so fixated on the eyes of this beast. They were huge eyes, the size of basketballs, and the odd thing was that they were blurry, looking like a droopy oil painting. It was an early summer morning, early enough to still be cool, but late enough to be clearly lit everywhere. I saw the creature at the kitchen window, ran out onto the front porch, got a better look at it. I wasn't about to go and check it out just yet, so I went in to grab my father's binoculars. When I got back to the front porch, the creature was gone, nowhere to be seen. So, being a brave 7-year-old boy, went out to inspect the area. I saw nothing, no broken branches or markings or anything. The one thing I remember about the area that was different was that it was dead silent in a forest normally bursting with noise, and there wasn't a single thing to be heard. And I mean that forest, where I used to live, was super loud too, with all sorts of animals making sounds at all times of day. Super weird anyway. I've never heard of any sort of cryptid that matches what I saw that day. So, this happened last year. My aunt likes to travel a lot now that she's retired, and she'll ask me to take her to the airport. She lives about an hour outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, in a pretty rural area. She doesn't like traveling out of PHL and will instead go to EWR Newark Liberty International Airport for those not familiar with the code or area. So last year, she decided to go to South and Central America for a month and asked me to come to her house to drive her since she didn't trust my brother to actually show up when he said he would. I met her at her place the night before, went to bed for a few hours, and then we left in her car at 1 a.m. so she could get to the airport on time. We decided to take her car because it's a mid-size SUV that held her luggage better than my sedan did. I guess we had been on the road for about 20 minutes. I'm not entirely sure because my perception of the passage of time isn't amazing, but we had to drive through a lot of small little old villages. Not sure what else to call them. They were basically clumps of tent houses in a small area. The homes were all super close to the road, like basically right on top of it, which helped to note them as being a lot older. None of the lights were on, not even candle lamps in the windows, and if you're from Pennsylvania, you know what I'm talking about. With those lamps, they were everywhere. The area had a lot of woods. It was overall just very creepy and very foggy out. We were driving along and all of a sudden we came up on something. It was facing toward a telephone pole off to the right of the car. The pole was just in front of a garage or a small barn structure. All I could see was the back of its head, completely white, no hair in its hands and its forearms, which were also totally white. It looked like it was wearing a dark shirt, but it was facing away from us, leaning into the telephone pole with its arms up against the pole and its head against its arms. Or at least a stance similar to that. The worst feeling I have ever felt rose up in my chest. When I saw it, I felt my heart almost stop and drop into my stomach. I felt sick and terrified. All I knew was that, whatever it was, I didn't want it to turn around. No matter what, I knew it couldn't be allowed to turn around and I would regret it. I've seen a lot of really weird things in my life and felt a lot of really weird sensations. I've always been super sensitive to the energy in homes, and I have straight up seen ghosts in my parents' home, one of which I am very wary of. The other I am comforted by, but that's a different story for another time. However, this was actually terrifying. I cannot explain the immense feeling of dread and horror I experienced in that moment to you. You can only understand if you've experienced it yourself. We passed by it so quickly, and it was so late that I thought I must have imagined it, but that feeling stuck with me. I didn't say anything to my aunt. I thought she didn't see it either. Well, about 10 seconds after we went past it, she says, "Did you?" And then a long pause. "Did you see that thing?" We talked about it, and she described to me exactly what I saw. I knew right then and there that I was going to be terrified to drive back to her home to switch cars at 4 or 5 a.m. when I got back to her place from the airport by myself. All I could think is that I didn't want that thing to be there because I would hit it if it came into the road, and I wouldn't stop to check. If I knew it wasn't going to get to me, luckily it wasn't there. Well, I drove past the same area again on the way to her home, and believe me, I was hyper aware the entire way there. I was even terrified to walk from her front door to my car and locked myself in as soon as I sat down and shut the car door. The next time I drove her to the airport, I looked for it, but it wasn't there. I haven't seen it since. I regularly told a couple of friends about it, and one of them and her best friend saw something similar peeking at them around the backside of her house when they were sitting in her car one night. She also lives in rural Pennsylvania, 19 miles from me, a 40-minute drive, and I'm about 22 miles outside of Philly. Also roughly a 40-minute drive. She also lives out in the woods. Have any of you ever experienced something like this? I saw a video once online of something that just had a white head and white long legs walking around, and it didn't look like that. This thing was tall and had distinct arms and legs. It had no hair whatsoever on its body. I don't know if it had facial features because it was faced towards the pole, almost like it was counting for hiding their seek with its arms up. It might have been hugging onto something black, and I experienced the worst and most deeply jolting fear in its presence, and I was only near to it for a few seconds. It was late October when the call of the Alaskan wilderness beckoned me once more. The days were growing shorter, the nights colder, but this was the time the forest felt most alive. I packed my gear, packed my rifle, and left my small cabin near Kenai for a week-long hunting trip deep in the heart of the Alaskan interior, a place where nature was raw, beautiful, and terrifying. My name is Jack, a seasoned hunter with more stories than scars and enough survival instincts to guide me through the most unforgiving terrains. But there was one experience, one haunting moment that shattered every rule I believed in. On the second night, I set up camp beneath a canopy of pine and spruce. A fire crackled, sending shadows dancing against the towering trees. The wind whispered secrets as it wove through the branches. But there was another sound beneath it, almost imperceptible, a soft rustling as if something heavy and deliberate was moving in the distance. I paused, straining to listen. The forest fell silent. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end, but I shrugged it off as a wandering elk or bear, common enough in these woods. Still, I kept my rifle close. I settled into my sleeping bag, the unease gnawing at the edge of my mind. Sleep came fitfully. The deep silence of the woods pressed against my ears, broken only by the occasional crack of a branch or distant hoot of an owl. At some point in the night, I woke up abruptly. The fire had dwindled to embers, casting a faint glow over the camp. But beyond the flickering light, I saw them, two eyes, yellow and luminescent, staring at me from the dark. I froze, my heart thundering in my chest. The eyes didn't move, they didn't blink. They were set too high off the ground to belong to any animal I knew. I reached slowly for my rifle, and the metallic click of the safety sounded like a gunshot in the stillness, and then the eyes vanished. At dawn, I ventured out to investigate. The morning light filtered through the trees, painting the forest in a palette of golds and greens. But my blood ran cold when I found tracks leading up to the edge of my camp. They were large, canine-like, but too wide and deep to belong to any wolf or dog. They circled my camp, then disappeared into the thicket without a trace. I had hunted wolves before. I mauled their tracks, their behavior. This was different. This was calculated, almost human in its precision. The following night, I didn't light a fire. I sat in the dark, rifle in hand, eyes scanning the woods for any sign of movement. The hours dragged on, 1 minute ticking away with tension, and just as the clock neared midnight, I heard it. A low growl, deep and resonant, coming from just beyond the tree line. I aimed my flashlight into the woods, the beam sliced through the dark. For a moment there was nothing, and then it stepped into the light. It stood nearly 7 feet tall, its body covered in matted dark fur. The face was elongated, lupine but twisted, with an intelligence that defied reason. Yellow eyes locked onto mine, and the snarl curled its lips to reveal rows of jagged teeth. I was paralyzed, rooted to the spot by a fear so primal it seemed to sap the strength from my limbs. The creature took a step forward, its movements graceful, almost deliberate. I raised my rifle, my finger trembling on the trigger. The shot echoed through the forest, sharp and deafening. The creature flinched but didn't fall. Instead, it let out a gravelly howl that seemed to vibrate through my bones and retreated into the shadows as swiftly as it had appeared. By the time morning came, I was already packing up my camp. I knew I couldn't stay. Not after that, as I retraced my steps back toward civilization. I felt eyes on me, the sensation of being watched, tracked. I moved quickly, refusing to look back. Each rustle and snap of a branch ignited fresh waves of panic. When I finally reached my cabin, I locked the doors and windows, the weight of what I'd seen pressing heavily on my chest. I reported the encounter to the local authorities, but they dismissed it as a bear sighting, their skepticism evident in their forced smiles and polite nods. But I knew better. The creature wasn't a bear, nor was it any known animal. It was something older, something that didn't belong in the realm of the natural. And though I never saw it again, I could never shake the feeling that it was still out there watching and waiting in the deep woods of Alaska. This story takes place in the backcountry of the area where I grew up. Be warned, some of this might be too frightening for some readers. Reader discretion is advised. Back in 2019, there was a big uproar about unknown creatures roaming the forest like Bigfoot and skinwalkers, but this story isn't about them. This story is about one of the scariest things I've ever heard about, the Wendigo. Once, after my friend Jacob mentioned this uproar, I went to see him since I had been away, enlisted in the United States Marines. I got back after being discharged, and one of the first things I did was go and see him. We were having a good old time when he brought up the idea of going out to a little hangout spot his now ex-girlfriend had taken him to. When they wanted to get away for a few hours, I decided why not. So I grabbed my gun and we went out to this extremely secluded area, the old dock that was there. It had been pretty much forgotten by the looks of it, poorly maintained with some boards almost completely rotted through. About 30 minutes into our shenanigans, Jacob brought up the topic of the Wendigo. The name sounded a little scary, even for me, curious. I asked him about it. He said that if you went into the woods and said Wendigo 3 times, you would come across the scariest thing you've ever seen, calling his bluff. I told him to prove it today. I wish I hadn't. We started walking on this little path that led deep into the thick woods close to the Alabama state line. We walked for maybe 20 minutes and decided we were in a good spot. It's worth noting that it had been raining a lot over the past couple of days, so the ground was completely saturated with water. I turned to Jacob, and he dared me to do it. I stood there in complete silence. The rest of the forest was almost silent as well, besides the tall pines swaying high above our heads. Reluctantly, I slowly started to say it. Wendigo, Wendigo. Then nothing happened. I let out a silent sigh of relief. One thing about Jacob and me is that we loved proving each other wrong. In our friendship of 10 years, this was one of the first times I had proven him wrong. We started to talk a little smack. When we heard a noise in the distance, my marine reflexes kicked in, and I immediately snapped toward the direction of the noise, which was just then turning into noises. I started to move closer to the noises, and shortly after, we saw a few coyotes running across the path about 30 feet in front of us. I breathed another sigh of relief, but it didn't last long. I knew something was up. I didn't know what, but I knew it was time for us to leave. As we turned to leave the woods, all of a sudden a tall pine tree started to groan and creak as it began to come down. During this, in a moment of pure instinct, I shoved Jacob forward as the tree came crashing down, landing right between us. Jacob let out a cry of terror as the tree landed, and I hopped over it to get to him. I could feel his heart pounding like a drum as I grabbed him by his shirt and yanked him to his feet. He was still terrified and practically crying as I screamed at the top of my lungs. "Move, Jacob, move now." I spun him around hard, causing him to fall to his knees. I quickly got him up and we both started sprinting down the path back the way we came. I didn't dare look back, and neither did Jacob. I was sprinting through the woods when a familiar sound came from behind me. "Jacob, Jacob, come quick." It was the sound of Jacob's younger sister, Olivia. He turned and tried to get past me, screaming Olivia the whole time. I stopped him and said, "Jacob, look at me. It's not her. Do you hear me? It's not her." Then another pine tree started to buckle. I saw it just in time to tackle Jacob to the ground. As we were nearly crushed, I screamed at Jacob once more. "Go, get out of here, go now." As I was yelling, I pulled my gun out of my waistband and aimed it down the trail from where we came. Jacob made it to the opening of the trail and turned back, noticing I was still aiming my gun. "Badly, get out of there, come on, hurry," I said. I turned and started sprinting towards him. As I made it into the clearing about 50 feet, we both saw it, the thing we had summoned, the Wendigo. It stood about 9 feet tall on its hind legs. There was practically no meat on its bones, with skinny legs and even skinnier arms. Its skin was pale white, almost like a vampire's, but the thing I noticed most were its eyes, a vibrant blue, almost like lightsaber blue for those who have seen Star Wars. Having had enough fear, I raised my gun and fired at the Wendigo. Jacob didn't stick around to see if I'd killed it. Instead, he turned and ran towards the car. I did the same as he passed me. That was my first experience with the so-called Wendigo, and I pray almost every night that I never have to encounter something that terrifying again. Thanks for listening, horror cowboys. See you tomorrow at the same time.